Atlain gunas chi shaya. Achtu yake yake iti. Ya hasta on the cook on. Akaya you do a sock. Wait Akaya haswud za on. Ak. Ya yachtitan kawushkitan hasta on the kokaya yechani. Wasahatu wasagu. Ke guchtino e hayukatungi. Kleidihino e hoach. Kleu to ish edach. Kuchte kenas ach hayukatungi. Kuchte kenas ach. Ya so jin aya. Ya hastu jinach aya. Kukwits is in aya hayukatungi. Tachonach kleshatua oshko. Kawayektewe kawus achi. Atwe kagachtu hich aya hayukatungi teen. Tachaya yejagachtu ne. Yachte katuhan. Wujin kusachan katusha an teen. Ya ach. Yewe ach tu ye ti ya yedat. Ituwu de guy. Yewe ach tu wasagu. Katakuhin yach nakati ituwu. Ye awecho ach. Just niya aya we do anada yihin. Kachtakuhin you do a sa. Ye awe. Ach tu wasagu kayed hakayeti. Chade hanai ukon. That's it hard. Kashyan khatu ne. Kakhwa ach aya. Ya shkhwat de wut. Aqa awe qanne ukhke wuti aya akh khusti. Akh shat tsu. Kakhunakh kawa aq khitu dishi. Achwe ya yitat chaye ku genki a. Khutyakh yati ya akh khusti qa akh tundetan. Achwe akh ish has ya ka gwantan has khawus akhiti dishi. Ye awaha shingit khusti. Wuchach gedasha ye jene kaha khusti. Gunas chi shach eti. Wasach tuasagu. Chu oya. Yishish ohas. Yiguk yiktewe yuch ewatan. Kai in hasakawa nik data tinach sahayati. Yayagi. Hachaklaki awe. Yejigi nature yahayuchat. Yiyuchatangida. Gunas chish. Thank you all. Welcome.
Cheers. To cut you on. To Zoom tonight, Hachikaudia. To Gunaksa. Hachikaudia. Hunke. Yay, that. Tiakwa. Dayuk. Istiatia de. Achish Kihas. Yitun the Tani. Adewuti. Ya. Achaya in Kakodatanya that the Ish Kakote Katuan, you Katangi on Yejine Tlakwasa Hatuyak air to Kalkai, you had the Wuhan, Hayan what, Anakas on Yan good. Achaya the wood how to take what Jankwa Katuaknuch so Yuhan Ade Satinia Takwasa Hatu Nalchinch Achaya Gunstishi Katuan Ye Ayak Toasku in Kahoniki, Jay Goat, Rakish Kihas Gunstish, Ye Ayak.
Sheesh. So just some welcoming remarks here as we get started. I offer apologies. Things got a little out of control because I was not ready. Then I was trying to hurry myself. Then I forgot stuff. Then I asked my wife to run stuff over here. Then the car went off the road. She's okay, but Touch and Fuller went to go get the stuff that I'd forgotten. So then it just got me thinking about like starting today, with the words of our ancestors and welcoming folks here onto the ancestral land of the Akhuan peoples. And because I was feeling vulnerable and upset, I asked my father's people and Chish to help by offering words of welcome this morning. And then thinking about my hope for you, and maybe this is somewhat symbolic of the stuff that we go through as we do this work. And my hope was that you're feeling calm, like we say, tuwu daga, like your spirit or thoughts is like the slack time. Then the other way we talk about it is let it be like water. Let your spirit or your thoughts be like water that has settled itself clear. There's a river right down there, down the ways a little bit. It's called Kahtakuhin, a river that runs itself clear. And then this little lake out here is called Ak, and this is the land of the Akhuan people. The two clans that are in this area are Yachtetan and Wushkitan, and we're very grateful to live on their land and to work on their land. And we hope that, like some of the stuff that I think about in doing a lot of this work is a lot of our elders have told me doing close work with them that from a long time ago they started to feel like it was drifting out of their hands. So my hope for you today is that you'll always be hearing the voices of your ancestors, like they're right there just talking into your ear, telling you what you need to do this work in your language, that you're not feeling alone, that you're feeling supported, and that we're going to talk about some things and share some things today. Just a couple of process things. If you go right out this door, if you're in the room, and you head down just a little ways on the left-hand side are the restrooms. A little bit further down at the end of the hall, towards the end of the hall, on the left-hand side there's a water faucet if you want to fill up a cup full of water, feeling thirsty. Just past that there's a coffee shop if you want to get some kind of specialty drink. We also have coffee, hot water, tea, some snacks from the legendary Breeze Inn here in Juneau. And that's kind of what I said. Do you want to translate Ki Tinai, what you said for them?
So,
So I guess it goes to Ki Unique, EU Katangi.
I addressed my father's nephew, my father's people, and how he was feeling, and that we are in such times where our elders are fast leaving us, and we feel those heavy emotions. But when we come together and gather together and we see all of you, it gives us strength to see one another, and that's how I'm feeling today. That our elders are fast leaving us, but when we come and gather, it gives us strength. It always gives us strength to see one another. And that's how I was feeling and relayed my feelings to my father's nephew.
Okay. Sorry.
Nick,
Not usually a big disaster.
do you want me to help you with Zoom?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll make you
Let me
a
log in.
co-host.
I'll log in.
And then we have this little device here. We're going to send this around the room first to say hello. And then, there's all kinds of people. We have this little device that we're going to switch over to. And okay.
Right here.
So this thing is called a meeting owl. But in our classes, we didn't want to have an owl looking at us in the face in the daytime. Sounds like bad luck to me. So I asked some students, I said, what should we call this thing? And one student said, let's call it the Eye of Sauron. I said, I like that. And I was doing, so let's call it tatuwu, which is our word for a little bird called chickadee. And when a chickadee sings at you, it means somebody's thinking of you. It's like, okay, I like both those ideas. So we have renamed this little device Katuwu, or no, was it Soron Katuwu? So it's the chickadee of Sauron. So we merged those two ideas. So now you should be able to see folks, hear folks. We'll go to our left because going to your left brings you good luck. We can always use that. And just say hello, your name, language you're working in, maybe a wish.
Yaglidu, Joel Isaac Shiiji, then Ina Lakayish Shiiji. Hi everyone, my name is Joel Isaac. My Denai name is Lakayis. And the wish thing is throwing me. I wish that we have a future very soon that supports what we're doing as a regular thing.
Chinera.
Zerota Sandra Shagan of Stewart Suzatilan, Anakotana Suzatilan, Talchina Kaira Karaslan. My name is Sandra, and sometimes I'm called Swan Lady, but I'm here to learn, and I'm so happy to be here in your land. And it almost seems like Anchorage because you guys got snow.
Oh, you guys brought it. Okay.
I was almost thinking, did it go
Okay.
back? Did it go back to Anchorage? I was all ready for the rain. Okay, well, anyways, it's really great to be here, and my wish is that, I teach in Atna Dene, and my wish is that our languages become normal in everyday situations for our children.
Zandazun, Anna Cox Uza, the Hundanaka Haltani Lato Rassisni, Medich Tochut Anna, Galta Hut an Aslam. Ya Idatlinget Ani, Kachichat Yeti, Actualinget Ichatangish Duchaltu, so Achtwasigu, which in Atu Litzini, Guntish. Hi, my name's Anna. I'm Caribou Clan. I belong to the village of Caltag, and we're Koyukon Athabaskan. Now I live on Tlingit land, so that's why I study Tlingit. And my wish is that together we feel strong. Thank you.
My name is Andrea Devis. I'm Associate Professor of Spanish, and sometimes I have co-taught AKL classes for teaching methods. And so my wish is that we will have more than enough Alaska Native language faculty so that I won't teach those classes.
Ang alagum ayaga asak dakok unangak akok ako tanamilaka ng yaktakok maavak dakok kiri humunanga akok Tlingit ang nakakinangin maan karasa chuzakok Kawalangam tinangin kukan na nakakizak UAA ilan awazak. Good morning, everyone. Kawasagok to the Tlingit people for having us here and welcoming us on your homelands. It's so wonderful to be here. I love being native and being accused of bringing the weather everywhere with you. Everywhere you go. It's the best part. I am Unangach. I was born and raised in my village in Akitan, or Achinmingiva, in Unangam Tanangin, in Kirirum Tanangin, or the lands of my people, the Kirirum people. I live and work right now in Kawalangam Tanangin, in my neighboring homelands. I work at UAA, and it's been really wonderful to be able to teach and live in my homelands at the moment. And my wish for our languages is that we can go forward together in a good way and work with each other to make sure that our kids and our kids' kids, our kids' have our languages. Kovaskok.
Hi everyone, I'm gonna move here so I can address everyone. My name is Keji Hotawakan. That is the name my mother gave me. It is my Dakota name. My English name is Christian Nault. Kagwantan Yadi Ayakhat. My father is Kagwantan. I'm grateful to be here to live and work on these lands among the Akwin Takuquan. And currently I'm a program manager at Alaska Heritage. I moved here about 6 months ago. I was born in Yakima, Washington on the territory of the Yakima people, and I was raised among the lands and waters of the Squaxin Island tribe. I study linguistics at University of Washington, and it is my hope to learn Tlingit and Dakota, and to one day teach one or the other, or even both, and do as much as I can for my languages and my peoples. It's good to see everyone today. I'm excited to be here. My ultimate hope, at least the first step, is that the learners of today will learn their languages and bring them to their homes where they can reignite the embers that were passed down to us by our ancestors, and to reignite the fires in our homes, the fires in which are the ways and languages and words and the thoughts and the ways of being of our peoples, and that from there that we can bring it outside of our homes and bring it back to the land and the waters and share it amongst ourselves and with others. I hope that covers it. Goodness, geez, I'm grateful to be here.
Okay, geez.
Hello everyone, I'm Leah Urbanski. I work as a project coordinator for the Hayuhatangi Day program that supports the 3 heritage language, Haida, Tsimshian, and Tlingit. My hope is that these scholars will continue to feel supported throughout their language journey, and that future iterations of this grant will also create that kind of space for future scholars, and that there is just continuous support for future language learners.
Okay. And our folks who are online, if you want to say hello, go ahead. You can also put it in the chat too if you feel like we need to move along.
Can you hear me? Hello?
I can hear you.
Okay, hi, Yate. My name is Bridget. I was at the UAA, not I think it was Saturday and Friday for that meeting we had for language revitalization. And I guess I'll start with myself. Bridget Bigay Inishia, Twittijin, Kiani Inishla Twittijidi Bashashin, Bitani Dashte, Sanajini Dashnala. I'm of Tower and House Clan, Bitterwater Clan, Leaf Clan, and Black Streetwood Clan. And I'm originally from New Mexico, but I'm here in Alaska learning about languages. And just good to hear you guys and be here. And my wish is that we find faith in, on this path to getting back our languages and learning again. Thanks.
Geesh. And is it Nanenishlan? Nanenishnan?
Nani Nishna.
So close and so far.
Close. Sidu Nani Nishna sis na kaya since yadin. Sidu tatla dene eshti dene. Hi everybody. My Athabasca name is Nani Nishna, which is a metaphor that resembles a waterfall, a source of water that came from somewhere big it's still there. It's still going. I come from the Tatla people, the headwaters people of the Copper River. I'm from the village of Chisachino, Alaska, and I also come from the Dethad people of Tanacross, Alaska. One of my wishes, my wish right now I want to share right now for our language and our people is, especially I'm working on and with the Atna language, and my wish is for us to be able to do all our traditional ceremonies in the language, to go back to using the language during our ceremonies. Sinan.
Man, else want to say hi?
Hi, my name is Chinera.
Yeah.
I can
Ramona. They have a
go
conference going
if
on.
nobody else is.
Yeah, I'll go out here and talk to you. Ayla, you should be sitting.
Oh, am I interrupting somebody? I don't want to interrupt somebody.
Go ahead.
Kukish kla yu chat du asok. Line di nachatsati ankach hitach angun kwan. My name is Chinera Johnson. I live in Angoon. I am from the Central Valley House for Line di Dog 7. I work for Gold Belt in the Chatham School District with Marcia Hodge. We have language classes that we offer to high school students. And my wish would be that we normalize our languages and use them every day.
Jeez. Can Kaudini Quaka? Yitkoha.
Gonna chisha wasa yikayat xitiha ya hatlingit gachtusla ada datcha yisikuha chok kunachutuskun ha jidasa adat wutusli atnuchka ya tat kik to ya it tuk to hin yikta wasa ha in has kanig nuchka wasa ha kustik kutiha yewa dat to watanya ha yukatangi ha atlit ko has sashal shake shakao yukatangi tsa ha ya Jasaktuasigu ha jatlakawai ya tlingit kainach wutul atka klitzin atuk satecha so kanech to atutsati wasa wutuach hatletsin nutra to niktain adach no good nutcho to hatu wu gadenatin nutra kayet yachnakati uhan hatu wu yewa twasigu in kakonikha je kunach achtu wu sigun uchha atlingit kainach utul at to kunchish tlingit kainach to in kwatancha. I would like to say that it is so good and wonderful for us to listen and hear our language and to hear the desire of our young people to want to learn the language. We have a long ways to go. I'll say this here, we have no real fluent speakers anymore, hardly. You know, I listened to Cyrus Peck speak about our language, and this was in the 1960s or 70s. Some of you weren't even born yet. And he spoke about our language, and he used one word in their language, and he pronounced and said the word. He says, I want to know anyone who knows the meaning of this word. There was really no one who could say. He said, if I were to try to explain this word, it would take me all day, and I still wouldn't finish it. And this has been going on for years. I wanted to continue our language and to speak it. I'm really thankful for my son Joseph, who mentioned that how many decades have we been teaching and trying to allow our children to learn the language? How many speakers do we have? Are our children speaking the language on the playground? Are we conversing with each other with our language to where we can understand each other? Where are we at? Yewe hasilkwasye eskaniknuska. Kukadehan, adayu naskein. Step back and look around you and see where you're at. And this is what we're doing today. We're standing still and we're looking about ourselves. By each and every one of you, what you say, what you do, how you present yourself, how you look towards each other for strength and courage. Those are similar things that I heard already this morning, and that it would continue on, that we would strengthen each other, and that we'd encourage each other. And we need to make sure we're saying the words properly. We need to make sure we're interpreting the words properly, because when we don't, that's going to change our whole grandchildren's way of life. Yeah, well, cheese a cheese achia to tatra. Cheese.
Jeez.
Yeah.
Yaglidu. Andrea Ivanov Shiiji Denein Ashlan Shida Kakhnu Shugu Yeshtuda. This is Andrea Ivanov, and Jennifer Williams is here, and Yvonne Flynn, and we work for Kanaiti Indian tribe on the Deneina language revitalization project Hiwaki. And so yeah, we're just saying hi. Shinan.
Yeah. Anyone else? You have the option of putting it in the chat as well, if you folks want to get going.
I'll next.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and then Achumi's task is pointing, getting those verbs in there. That's what they were telling us. Yeah, or needs and stand up there. Like that's I started trying to.
You're not muted if you're.
I muted her.
Thank you. Okay.
Meraweka nananiat sa Kate, sana nasuka may bunitsi. Tatanaitan na se namawaipa de sa koima ada de sa naisha dene. Hi everybody, I am Kate Puyanofkit, and I'm actually calling in from Oklahoma, from my homelands. I'm Kiowa, Comanche, and Apache. And I felt out of place at first because I'm like, everybody's Dene. And I'm like, wait, you're Dene too. And so I just want to say thank you for having this and having me here. And my wish would be that, particularly for my languages down here, that we see the culture of change and support that's happening in our language program spread out to all of our people.
Hey, Ganesh, nice to see you.
You too.
Andres Javier, my name is Javier. I work for K2O, and I'm also sitting in Tlingit. I think my wish is that I was on Dena'ina land last week, and I was really surprised to hear someone speaking Tlingit, and it was really, I guess, as a learner who's mostly been learning over Zoom, it was really exciting to have a short conversation in person, and that was really powerful. So I guess my wish is that, the languages of these lands be heard more publicly, and that there are more interactions like that. And that members of the media continue to think about how they can contribute to language revitalization.
Lachishu, Janame Aduch Dee, Si Chushia Sophie Brodkin, Aduch Dee. I am Iak, Siat Cordova Ach, I live and work on the land of the Washoe. My wish is that our children pass our language down to their children and continue finding community with other Alaska Native and Indigenous peoples. Awata. I'm here with my friend and supporter, Allison Barnes, and we are currently working on archival work.
Wa'achta.
Sheesh.
No one else is going. Ulami. Uvanga Christian at Tuktuak Justice. Hi, Sandra. I haven't seen you in a long time. Utkeving Murunga. Ili Sarirunga Nipiatun. So I worked for the last 8 years teaching Inupiaq at Barrow High School and at the alternative high school here. And I've just recently moved back to just department work, working in the Inupiaq Education Department for the North Slope Rural School District. And I'm doing everything I can to support the Inupiaq language teachers, developing curriculum and materials for them, and helping them with language training. And my wish, especially after Friday and Saturday's meetings were actually very sobering for me, because it just reminded me of how far we have to go still. We do not have Inupiaq immersion in all the schools. Right now, we only have ECE immersion in 2 of the schools. And both of those ECE immersion teachers are language learners who are doing their best, but it's not an ideal circumstance. Because if you have a teacher who is still really much learning, they're not going to be able to do as much with the students. And my hope is that we will stay strong, keep that final goal in mind of having all of our students and their families using the language again, and that we not be overwhelmed by the size of the task.
Anyone else? You can drop in the chat as well, no worries.
Jan Gadouane. Oh, where is you Anna? Good day. I'm sorry, think it. You go ahead, I'll go after you.
Hey. Sorry, I didn't understand. My name is Ezra Keiko. I work with Douglas Indian Association implementing some grant objectives, and one of the current grant objectives that we're working on is with 7,000 languages. We're attempting at putting the language into a program where it can be easily accessible and taught anywhere. I work with a few of my colleagues are on here, and I've worked with many of you. Fred White, Paul Marks, Joseph Marks, Eva Marks, Paul Marks II, and Dion Blattner. We're all part of this amazing project, and so it's really awesome for us to have this opportunity to be able to dream it, share it. Thank you.
Sheesh.
Rico Haga. Eich Satimi. She'd kakechat yati. Sing it away, stuchas too. Khasat dudlak sai achjit would do it at the way kushek yuchat would do us all. Kuatla tu ayachat she Sitka School District tunach 1996 dach jagowa kahwa singit yuchatank kuchat khasla tu yeah achas Achtuasi go just singit yuchatank eid kawu. I would wish only for Tlingit language to be spoken in my language room. And it's very hard when there's just one speaker in the room. My wish is that all teachers could have a second speaker in the room who could present fluent conversation for especially beginners to hear and to absorb and to understand mannerisms that are traditional by watching instead of by hearing someone lecture them about it. So that is my wish. I wish there was 2 speakers in beginning classrooms so that they could model conversational speech.
Okay. Gunchish, Kutlek, Gunchish, Marx Klenk, all the big Marxes that are here. Your family is like a mountain in our territory. Skeki.
Gunchish Katea.
Oh.
Konakai do a sock. Gunchishi Hutai. Akas Kokaya Joe. Mask Ekpao. Gunchish Ezra. Hasai Yat has Tashukati Atia. Good to see some of my old colleagues on here. I now work for Douglas Indian Association. Lekeuchtini, Yewe Hatin Kushek, way Slinget Kutlatu. Vishandania Hayati. Where I be cocktail family Nakukati. So please go ahead. Now, cut you wish. That's why it's the case.
Oh, Achtuasigu dech you dech ku what classroom to shinget you atanka you has I was ku you was ku.
Oh, yeah, because we get was they were the case so dictate to yeah. Shinget you atanki kair to take apprentice to Inat Bugudi. They were cooked to Akia. Who's in school, Yayanaki. Nikutania, Akadea. My name is Parag. I work with Douglas Indian Association. It's good to see some of my colleagues on here. It's been a while since I've seen anybody. Been sitting behind this mask. But yeah, I understand what you mean by having a speaker and an apprentice. Is what our goal is trying to do right now, is having an apprentice go into the classroom and shadow them if they, or give them, take turns back and forth. That's plain you tank actually just actually cut to sheet cut to start. She's quiet good. Thank you all for listening.
Just play nach. I played click one yach kone yechikachtuni. Shuhan. Maybe just one more skeki, and then I don't mean to cut it.
At playing gonna choose you hard. Gonna choose after Wasigo. Sakai that. Gonna choose at least go has gonna choose ye jene kunachta kahadati. Steak a hatu a sak when a cow chukran shot a clickna hadiach dal kanuk Bad River Banyadi. Gonna choose plain. First of all, how exciting! Oh, to see all of you here and Ganesh for this opportunity. I see so many of my friends and relatives on here. We're sitting here and just so you know, we're in class right now. I'm currently teaching and we took a break today to work on our beadwork and our weaving and our things with our hands so we could spend time and use our minds and listen to this really important message. My nieces and nephews, they also have a wish that they'd like to share. We were talking and I said, what is your wish? What do you wish that our language would look like? And what is your wish for our programming? So they wanted to share with you as well.
My wish is that we continue having stories and continue sharing with future generations.
Mine is carrying on tradition.
My wish is to pass on the language and our culture onto the next generation.
All of our wishes really truly are embedded in our grandparents' teachings and learning. So we're so thankful to see so many of you here today. So just know that the words you're sharing are falling on our next generation right now. So
Sheesh. Walkie Charles.
I'd like to express my gratitude and honor to Kune for this opportunity to share with my bigger family statewide, and also to Kate. Welcome. You're just as much part of this conversation. Don't feel alone because we're here for the same reason. I hope I have the opportunity to speak this language of Yupik as well as my father has. I have lots to learn. I'm just beginning. He was 64 when he died 27 years ago. I just turned 65. And I still have a lot more to learn that he had within him. And so my wish, actually, it's a scolding, I guess, more than a wish. How are we going to change our ways to bring back language and culture? Because we can't just wait and wish. What are we going to do? And how are we going to get there? Because lots of you have said already how in danger we are with our languages. And I'm Walkie Charles. I'm with the University of Alaska Fairbanks, and I'm also the director of the Alaska Native Language Center. I also teach the bachelor's degree program of Yupik here at the university. My other wish is that we have more and more languages at the university level with a baccalaureate degree. Oyana.
Yeah. Okay, folks. If those of you who did not have a chance to let us know who you are, I do apologize. And I don't mean to make fun of us, but someone said it's so Indigenous to say you brought the weather with you. It's also very Indigenous to I was gonna write a play and it was called 5 Indigenous Peoples Introduce Themselves, a play in 5 acts. Because sometimes we could spend the whole day, but it's so wonderful to get to know each other, hear each other, see each other. This does tell me we don't see enough of each other. We really want to share who we are and what we're doing. And so this is a 3-day, I think 4-day workshop. I'm really grateful to the folks from the Salish School for spending a couple days with us. As we get started here in Tlingit country, I just want to say the names of Tunk, Smitty Katzik, and Dasta Ya, Ethel Makinen, for being wonderful. There are two master level speakers that we lost recently, and that certainly gets us under 10 in terms of speakers that can really do high level stuff. So wishing you all strength and comfort in the work that you do. And we have an ambitious agenda, so we will check back in if other folks want to say hello throughout the day if you didn't get a chance to introduce yourself, or if you have thoughts. But we do have a bit of stuff we're going to try and get through. I am going to give a lot of opinions today on how I think things should be done, so just bear with me through that, and do it how you think it should be done, though. I'm not going to pop up in your community and say, you shouldn't do it like that. But if I have a chance to say how I've done it, I'm happy to share some of those things, including things I think that maybe shouldn't be done. But some of these are just sort of design choices, other things like that. When I thought about this workshop, I really thought of my time in Hawaii. We spent a week at a retreat. So there, Ahapunana Leo is the name of their Language Nest network. It's a preschool program, a preschool system that operates entirely in the Hawaiian language. It was the building block of everything I think that they have over there, especially in Hilo. And it happened hand in hand with a program they constructed in their university. The Ahapunana Leo operates 11 months out of the year. They close for the month of July, and they spend 1 week of that where all the teachers and administrators, everybody comes together for a 5-day retreat where they determine the themes of the next year. They do trainings, they do, and I couldn't speak Hawaiian at that time, but I had a translator, who told us everything that was going on. It was unbelievable, the amount of language and the theme then, I think this was probably 2016, maybe 15, was go for the deep water fish. So I just love that. It's been sort of kind of a life philosophy of mine. And for me, when I think about stuff, making stuff for teaching languages, you got to try and catch every single person out there. You're trying to cast every type of net in every type of waters that you can, from your casual learner who wants to but can't invest the time for whatever reason, to your most dedicated learners who have that time, that energy, that interest. And I try to do these and think about this in the most non-judgmental way I can, because you never know when someone's going to be ready, and you need to be there when they are ready. And you also need to create the avenues for them to see. There's multiple pathways, but what our goal here is to dream it, to make it, and to share it. So we're gonna go through I'm gonna show you the agenda, then we're gonna turn it over to Sea Alaska Heritage Institute. Okay. Li'ili'i o lalo Hawaii. I can speak a little tiny bit of Hawaiian. If you would have caught me 4 years ago, I think my Hawaiian was okay. So here's the plan. I shouldn't have put subject to disorder because I thought it was funny, but now wheels are falling off of cars and snow, and so I accidentally teased the universe. But here's what we're going to try and go over today. So types of content, we're going to talk about print, video, audio, web and mobile stuff. I don't really do apps, so we're not going to talk about that, but there are groups like 7,000 Languages. There are apps like Duolingo and other things like that. That's not really my area of expertise, so I don't really have very much to say about it. But if you want to sort of go in that direction, I think go for it. Interface, like how do you organize this stuff and create a system so that people can find stuff when they're looking for it? For me, I use a blog, I use Google folders, and then I use YouTube. Again, and I'm going to talk about some specific things that I do, but there's other options out there. They should give me some money, but they don't give me any money. They don't give me anything, but these are just things that I've found that seem to be working. We'll talk a little bit about graphics, photos, illustrations, fonts, software. We'll do, if time allows, some walkthroughs of how to use interactive slideshows for teaching hybrid classes, how to use the Adobe Creative Suite, a program called TLEX, which is dictionary software, Elon, and then we'll also talk a little bit throughout the day on indigenous ethics and indigenous intellectual authority, which, integrating elders, making those your primary sources, ensuring that your cultural laws are being followed, and ensuring that you have some good idea of what the role is for non-Indigenous contributors, and maybe some things that you can do to avoid someone else trying to take ownership of your language. So that's the sort of general plan. We'll take one break from 12:30 to 1:30, and then if you need to step out and take care of any business, go for it. Eat all that stuff, or else I'll take it home and then I'll end up eating 10 donuts tonight because they are there. So I'm so happy you all are here. Those of you in the room, those of you on Zoom. I'll turn it over to Sealaska Heritage Institute now to talk about their publications and processes, and then I'll get right into this walkthrough. And I just want to show you folks the stuff that I've done. I'm not trying to, I don't know. I just want to show you like the ins and outs of how I've been able to get a few things done, and including some of the things that didn't work so well, and including some of the people who sent me nasty messages about what I do. And I just want to talk about that stuff as well, on how to overcome toxic behaviors in language communities. That's sort of like the subtitle of most presentations that I give, I think. And that was also a theme that we heard these last couple of days as well. But I guess the big thing I'd say about that is don't make that your focus. Don't let it distract you from what you're trying to do. Find ways to stay humble enough that you can receive criticism and think about it. But if somebody's just trying to hurt you or stop you or make you feel bad or make you seem like you're worse than you are to other people, then maybe don't give that very much time and attention, because I think you give it power if you sit there and stare at it and think about it. Okay, Nicole, eat koaha.
Ganashish Hune, Yake Yagi Lakatuhan, Yekatu Sauk Nicole Anderson, Blake Hakenach, Chushta Kla Aya Achsai, Ach Kla Shish Kastishi Tan, Ach Ish Hasawe Tegwe di Aya Dachanuhu, Gun Ye Dua Sauka Naka Hidi, Hutsnu Kwan. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nicole Anderson. My Xinca name is Trushta Kla. My mother's people are the Raven Beaver from Angoon. My father and grandfather's people are the Brown Bear. And my house is called the Freshwater Spring House. And I'm honored to be among all of you to present on Sealaska Heritage Institute's historical and contemporary language resource development efforts. I'll try to keep this brief because I know, Hune, you have a wonderful lineup, and I'm so excited for folks to engage with you and have open and transparent conversations about the difficulties of this work, but also why it's so important to keep pushing through, even through the hard and difficult times. So just a little background, I am the Deputy Director of the Education Department, and I oversee all of our language initiatives. So anything that's related to revitalizing the Xinca, the Khodkil, and Shamalgyak, good chance you'll be interacting with myself. And so I just wanted to share, back in 2019, Sealaska Heritage Institute conducted a survey count of remaining Fluent speakers, and there is only 106 remaining in all 3 languages combined. Majority of those speakers are over 70 years old, and these numbers have since decreased even since I've been in this role. And so the Tlingit, Khatkil, and Shimalyak languages have lost elders and important leaders. We still continue to fill that void today that they once occupied. So I just wanted to take a moment to give a heartfelt thanks to those who departed, and we acknowledge their contributions for creating the foundation for language learning as we continue to carry it forward today. But back in the 1990s, our board of trustees, realizing that time was running out, steered the Institute towards revitalization of languages. So they worked with native speakers and linguists and have been on the forefront of documenting Tlingit, Khatkil, and Shimalyak, developing orthographies for these historically oral languages, which have only appeared in written form in recent times. And since the 90s, the Alaska Heritage Institute has produced language books, including the 3 dictionaries that you might see circulating around. Workbooks, Hune has done a lot of great work for us. I'm hoping, my fingers are crossed, that the 2nd edition workbook will be printed and distributed shortly. And then also our Tlingit oral literature collection series. And we also do a number of teaching materials and curriculum lessons for teachers as well. Hune kind of touched upon interactive apps. We do have an iOS and Android app for the Tlingit language. And we're also currently working on language apps for Khatkil and Shimalyak. We also have a podcast where we feature notable speakers engaged in this work, like Hune. We brought some relatives from Hawaii as well, from Dene. And we have a YouTube page, series of introductory language lessons. So individuals interested in learning the language can visit a playlist and learn simple words and phrases in all 3 languages. And our lecture series that I just noted are also on that page, where you can learn language learning pedagogies, revitalization strategies, and what generally folks are doing around the globe to uplift and carry forward their heritage languages. So we do a lot, we have a lot, but there is still a lot that we have to learn. Interacting with Hune and other leaders in the different communities have made me stop and pause and what we're doing well and what we're not doing well at all. And Hune touched upon one of them, is how we interact with folks who are supposed to be helping us carry this work forward. Sometimes we put a lot of, whether intentional or not intentional, ill will on our speakers and the folks who are supporting us. And so I've just been trying to unpack ways to continue to build these relationships and nurture and be transparent about the work and how difficult it is and how we can support these folks who have been doing it for a really long time. So a question that the staff and I have really been pondering is, how do we indigenize the work that we're doing as we operate in this Western system? Like, what can we do as an individual and as a collective to really uphold the values of our ancestors? Just because we're in a tribal organization doesn't necessarily mean we're operating indigenously. So I invite you all to think about that as well, because that has hit me profoundly. But like I said in the beginning, I wanted to keep this short. So if there's any questions, I would love to answer them. If not, Hune, I would love for you to continue on with the program and have these wonderful conversations with the folks online and also in the room.
Cheese Klein. Any questions?
I have one. It's not very well thought out, but so SHI publishes language materials.
Yes.
We do.
What's the process for that? And do you know of other like regional nonprofits that help that kind of work, or?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so we do have a language review process, and that's one of the things I've been reflecting on and coming back to, as Hune probably knows very well. We have 2 linguists that look and review the work and provide feedback, but again, that feedback isn't always presented in a professional manner. And so I've been really thinking about how to, right? And so like, how do we nurture and grow our own folks to do that work? And who can I partner with? Who can I work with to really uphold students who have an interest in this work? But during that review process, they essentially just go over orthography. They make sure everything is kind of standard across the board. They'll ask questions. They work with elders within the community. And once everything has been finalized and reviewed, we will print the materials through an outside publisher and have it in the store, and we sell it just at cost. So we don't get a profit on any of our resources. That has bugged me quite a bit, just because we're trying to revitalize these languages. It doesn't make sense to me to charge folks to have access to something we're trying to get more speakers in. And so if you ever need a book or need a resource, I encourage you to email me, because I try to set aside funding for students and educators to purchase books for your classroom or for your own personal use. And I do have books in our language department area that are free. But essentially that's it. We have a language review process, we print the materials, and we sell it just at cost.
Sheesh. And I would say the review process has really helped some of my materials improve. Like I would say the content has improved through the process. But I would also say, just to be honest, someone who works there sent me a threatening letter like 3 years ago saying he was going to tell everybody how awful I am. And it was really toxic, and I think it was really racist, the type of correspondence that I have received. And so coming back to think about this process, one of the things that I would say is I hope whatever we do, it's Indigenous empowered, Indigenous led, and it's an indigenized process. At some point, we're going to have to figure out some other things. But my general recommendation is to train yourself and do it all yourself and use self-publishing resources, because it's totally possible these days. I don't really like Amazon as a company, but I think Kindle Direct Publishing right now is probably one of the best options out there in terms of a quick turnaround time, a high quality product. That's my current recommendation. There are certainly other ones, but I think they start to fade. They're not very well put together. Once you get them, they start to crack apart. But if you go the Kindle publishing route, buy it yourself and distribute it. Don't have people buy it from Amazon. Like, put it up there for sure, whatever. But if you buy it yourself, it's almost half the price. And then if you can especially get funding to do bulk purchases and give it away, we've had success with that from Teslin, and we've been able to distribute stuff using the funding that's available through in this case the First Nations. And then I see a hand up. Oh. Yeah, they learn Tlingit. One of them is very, very good, and is actually very good in a lot of different Alaska Native languages. But I would say that that letter was not intended to do anything except to hurt me, if you ask me. And it did. And I also, but I don't want to spend too much time on that because I'm like, well, let's do the stuff that produces things, produces results. I think Akhsani, I saw a hand up.
Yeah, Tlahuasagan Shish, Nekoyuk Atangi. I just wanted to ask if you could elaborate a little bit more about this publication process, because this is actually the first time I'm hearing about it. I do access the archives through SHI and do a lot of work with the recordings in my own research, but this is the first time I'm hearing about a publication process. And so if you could elaborate just a little bit, that'd be great.
Absolutely. So we've been doing a big push to have more print resources so we could send it out into the classrooms for use. So we get the materials, we will share it with our media department, they'll format it, lay it out, and we'll send it to an outside publisher to actually get the materials printed. And so once they're printed, we order X amount of copies. Normally we order 800 of the product itself, and then we'll have it in the store for sale. And that is, just at the cost. So like if you were to purchase a dictionary from us today, it would cost you $22 to purchase that book. And so you could order those books online through our Alaska Heritage Institute store, or like I said earlier, you can reach out to me if finance is a barrier, and I'll try to find ways to get you the resources you're requesting.
So if you are somebody who is just doing research on either Tlingit Haida or Tsimshian, and you wanted that be published, somebody could go to SHI through this whole process. Is that my understanding?
Yeah, so a lot of the stuff we print is tied to a grant. So with the Hayuk Atangi Deyi, Our Language Pathways Initiative, that's how we were able to fund the second edition workbook. It's going to produce a number of other resources tied to K-12 education. But Joseph, I know you're in a PhD program and are doing wonderful things as a student. If you reach out to Rosita, she loves producing and publishing research. And so I would encourage you to reach out to Kahani and see what your options are for publishing your research.
Okay. Okay. Let's see. And they did say there are two linguists working at SHI, and one of those is the one who sent the letter. So one of them is really good. I don't know how else to be like, what's it called? Anyways. Okay. So I am not a linguist. I don't play one on TV. When I got invited to apply to a PhD program in Indigenous, in Hawaiian and Indigenous language and culture revitalization through Kahakaula o Ke'ilikilani, I applied, and then when we went to my interview, I kind of made a joke saying I wanted to write a paper someday that said, linguists are humans too. And I'm not making fun of linguists necessarily. I think a lot of linguists are very, very good at understanding how languages work. But then sometimes it's interesting because they aren't that great at communicating with other folks. And so a lot of stuff that I think was being made about our language was inaccessible for a lot of our people because they didn't have, it's using a lot of terminology that's pretty specific to this field, very advanced. Yeah, and so like you had to sort of understand this whole field in order to understand what they're saying about how the language works. So what I always saw was my goal as being a bridge between some of this upper level sort of linguistic work that's being done to document how our language works, and then to help make that digestible for learners and to make it as usable as possible. So that was always my goal, was to sort of be a bridge. And then as I worked with folks in Hawaii, I did develop a couple of sort of fundamental foundational philosophies for how I approach all of this stuff, which is what this graphic is about. And I'm not going to sort of explain it all right now, but just trying to say, if you're trying to create, okay, if your language is endangered, you have to become an engineer of social change. You have to change individuals and families, you have to change communities and institutions, and you have to change the state and federal government. That's all. But you have to be strategic about what you do, when you do it, how you do it, who's going to do it, who's your partners, who you're working with. And so I think about that stuff all the time and how I'm going to be facilitating change, what the next moves are going to be, what can be done, what might not be able to be done. And then also, like, sometimes we have this thing of trying to figure out, well, we can't do that because they're going to stop us. But then sometimes we stop ourselves before we even try. So, but I think have a team of people that you work with all of this stuff so that you have folks to bounce these ideas off of. And I have several teams. I have legislative teams. I have educational teams. I have language production teams. I have, I have lots of folks that I do work with. And sometimes it's just one-on-one conversations. Sometimes it's sitting around at a table. And then sometimes it's sending stuff through networks and trying to take something from an idea to a finished product. I really like the route of low-run, self-publishing things because I think there's always going to be mistakes. And I'm not trying to do anything without mistakes. Like my uncle said when he was making a bracelet, he'd just make a big mistake pretty early in the process. So he's like, there, I got that out of the way. And then he just keeps going. I think the idea of trying to be perfect is a non-Indigenous idea. So I think it's fine to have mistakes and things. You fix them and you keep going. And you try not to be critical of each other, try to be supportive. But but also there's all kinds of people. Is a wonderful editor. I've got other folks who are wonderful. They'll just send me notes all the time. Got this kind of typo, that kind of typo, this kind of thing. So if you would like to see some of I wrote a dissertation. I got this stuff in the dissertation. I do come back to some of this stuff in terms of what is the whole sort of functioning process of language revitalization, what are the different components you need to think about. But we are here to sort of zoom in on kind of the corpus is kind of what we're doing here, but also the acquisition. So the corpus is like, how do you document your whole language? How do you make decisions about dialects, writing systems? How do you, and then it comes down even further into the graphics, like what font do you use? Why? What format are you using? Why? And so we're going to talk about this kind of stuff. And then also like the acquisition, it comes down to how do you make things easiest for your learners? So it shouldn't, I love all of my former teachers, but I have one who was pretty kind of famous for saying, like, on day one of the first class of your entire life taking Tlingit, he'd say, this is probably the hardest language in the whole world. I don't think there's anything more different. It's less like, should we start with that? So my philosophy is to lie to people and to withhold that information but just to take a different approach as well. Okay, let's get into it. And ask a question if you got it, share a thought if you got it. We're gonna go about 30 more, well, I guess about almost 40 more minutes, and then we'll take our lunch break. So let's start by talking about stuff that's in print. And I also want to acknowledge the Alaska Native Language Center as another printing place in Alaska. I do think we could sort of potentially consolidate all of our efforts So we had one group of illustrators and editors who know how to make a book look good so that other folks are getting content to them and working through these partnerships. But not every community might have a graphic designer who's ready to go or an illustrator who's ready to go. But you might also be able to build those things up. I think if we were to sort of fortify what the Alaska Native Language Center is, it could become a training ground for that as well. So that we could train people to be illustrators and graphic designers and video editors and audio editors, and then put them back into their communities to assist with content creators. So the areas that I think about in creating stuff for print, I think a dictionary. I love a dictionary that's controlled by the Indigenous community. I do think that this is a really good time for transitioning from non-Indigenous peoples coming in, doing wonderful, unbelievable work. And now I think it's time to hand that over to Indigenous peoples to take control of, which means someone's going to have to become the dictionary person. That means if you all are making new words, which you should be, English does it all the time. I didn't unfriend anybody until about 10 years ago. At least, well, they just weren't my friend anymore, but now I'm like, unfriend, right? So, but someone's going to have to be the person, whether you're using TLEX or something else, and they're going to have to run that software. And if you want to work on building it up and developing a template, and so I can help with some of that stuff. I'm not an expert in it. A lot of the stuff that I'm going to show you, I just sort of messed around with it, tried to figure out how it worked. I got to credit my father for that, because he used to bring home stuff like he'd bring home this telephone, like a rotary telephone when I was a little kid. He'd say, take this whole thing apart. And I'd take it all apart. And then say, put that thing back together, plug it in and see if it works, right? So he kind of got me started on like this idea of like, figure it out yourself and figure out how to do that. And I think he must have done a lot of that himself. He knew how to do a whole bunch of stuff. But a dictionary, and I'll show you the folks, the one that I'm currently working on that some people really don't like, but I'm not worried about that. And I'm going to tell you like my approach to trying to create it, trying to maintain it. Because if folks are out there making new words, they got to get that word to the dictionary person. Then that person's got to put it into the dictionary. So you also have to do pretty low runs when it comes to print, and then always have the updated PDF version. So I always have a PDF version, and then I have a print version for those who want one to carry around. Like I got 20 different things on this that are all Tlingit language stuff that I use to teach, to answer questions, to think if I can't think of the word for something, if I don't know how to say something or I need to check it, I can look it up on the phone pretty fast. But the Kindle publishing route I think works pretty well for having a print version, then have a PDF version in a Google folder. That's one of my main recommendations today, is to really structure a shareable Google folder with everything in there. I've got 11,000 things sit in a Google folder that I try to share with everybody. It includes illustrations, it includes pictures. Anybody who wants to use that stuff can use it. If you want to make flashcards, you want to do something, do it. We should all be collaborating, working together on this stuff. But the dictionary documents all known parts of the language. For me, I'm like, okay, let's have everything that's not a verb, then let's have all of the verbs, then let's have it in English. You also got to make some decisions. How do you alphabetize your language? So we've done it a little bit differently over the years. If you look at stuff printed in the 70s, it goes from the front of the mouth to the back of the throat. That's their that's the system of alphabetizing. What I'm doing is adapted from English, so A, B, C. We don't have a B, but we don't have a C either. So A, B, I don't know. But just figure it. But how do the vowels work? Because for Tlingit, you have 4 vowels that each have 4 variations. So I'm going to lump them together. That means I and E are going together, or the I and the double E, U and the double O. So they're all going to go under U. They're all going to go under A. They're all going to go under E. So you got to make some decisions like that. And a program like TLEX, you can alphabetize it however you want. Little symbols, all kinds of stuff. It's pretty powerful and it's built for that kind of stuff. The next thing is a workbook. So what are you going to give to language learners so that they can sort of take a look and see roughly the step-by-step process, so that you can basically say, teach whatever you want, teach however you want, but just make sure they know all the content in this, and that would be level 1. Then we'll get to the next one, level 2. I like to do lots of visual representations of things with English and little letters. So if you're going to say Wasus, you can have a picture of a cow, and it's not even going to say cow on it because you can look at that picture, you know what it is. So really trying to do a lot of consistent visual representation of what this noun is referring to. And then everything I make afterwards uses that exact same picture of that cow. But, you know. Okay. Then a grammar explains the grammar of the language. It walks through all the parts. It's not necessarily a teaching guide. It's just saying, okay, you need to know how that works. I will tell you, and also read this chapter. And then we'll go over some exercises in a workbook, right? So it's basically a bit of an under the hood type of look at your language. And you are going to have learners who are they're just structural learners. Like, I need to know, what is a classifier? What is this prefix? What is this thing? And you put that all into one text. And you have decisions to make as a language community. Just because this is what linguistics calls it doesn't mean that that's what you have to call it. But you have to make a decision. When does it make sense to call it something different? Like, we have a verb mode called the potential attributive. And I understand why it's called that. But it means can't do it. That's all it means, is can't do it. And if I say potential attributive, you just don't use that in I potential attributive that, right? It just doesn't make sense if you just sort of say it like that. So there's always a bit of a negotiation. You're going to need some folks who are going to go out into this field of linguistics and figure out where's the boundary in terms of your language and what makes sense. And that might change over time. We got a whole bunch of codes for what we do in Tlingit. We might shift that over the next few years and start using, I was talking with folks in the Mohawk language, and they started calling it like the past tensor and the future tensor or something like that, right? But do stuff that makes sense for your community, because you don't want people alienated from their own language. Mm-hmm. They'll feel like, well, it must not be mine because I don't know what attributive means. I don't know what an indirect object is, right? And then you're going to have some folks who probably know some of that stuff, but don't make it essential to understand it in order to use the language. The next thing is literature. So examples of oratory, speech making, conversation, so that you have sort of larger text to go through. And if you're just getting started, then this might be, okay, we've got these stories. So how, after the Salish workshop, I've started doing something I've been thinking about for years. So I'm taking a story like the woodworm story. I've got a complete telling of that story from a fabulous elder named Chukatine Jane Smarch. We'll take that story, it's about 180 lines, I think, and that'll be for the advanced learners. Then I'm going to cut it down to 100 lines for the intermediate learners. Then I'm going to cut it down to about 50 lines and simplify it for the beginning learners. Then I'm going to cut it down to 20 lines and really make it straightforward and simple for the preschoolers. Exact same story going through these, it's gradated, right? So you need someone who, I guess you need to empower yourself with the authority to do that. Because sometimes you might feel like, I'm taking the words of my elders and cutting it out, but you're actually just creating a step-by-step, you're getting people there. Because if we start, if this was English 100 level English for people who don't speak English, I'm gonna be like, okay, Hamlet, right? Like that's not gonna be where we start, but we might build ourselves up to that. And so I think you're building a cultural framework, you're getting them familiar with the story. And then you got the audio, hopefully you have the audio. And you can give them the full version, but then say, we just want you to start with this one. Make sure this is the one we're going to work from, because for us, once you get into storytelling and speeches, it starts to get so big that it's really hard. It's really complicated. Like you want to teach Raven stories, like Raven's almost impossible to translate because he'll say things like that roughly translate, is there no way possibly that you might not trade this with me? Because he does this kind of double talk all the time. But also in literature, you want to give full examples of how the language functions as well. So a whole series of, we're working on a whole series of conversations. Alice Taft Chalk, she worked on this project where she saw there's hundreds and hundreds of hours of recorded Tlingit. We're very fortunate to have that because of Nora Dowenhauer, Forrest DeWitt, John Marks, Frederica de Laguna, and lots of others who recorded Tlingit, Rosita Whirl. So we have probably 1,000 hours of Tlingit if you just really added it all up. But most of it is individuals telling stories or giving speeches, so they're using this very elevated form of the language. So what Alice wanted to do is record people having conversations and then transcribe and translate that. But that's the literature, the whole portion is all like literature, right? Like people who speak the language fully and then taking that and creating learning materials out of it. And the last one is activity books and textbooks, games. Games should be on there as well. There's a website, gamecrafter.com. Highly recommend it. I'll show you folks this game. You can make all kinds of stuff if you can think it, and then you get some graphic design skills and some basics. Like you could put it takes a lot of time and sort of organization, but you can make it. So the next vision, I think, after this verb component game, I haven't finished it yet. A whole bunch of people have bought it, and they're like, there's no instructions. I was like, well, I don't know what to do yet. But the next one is going to be a massive like role-playing game where you hike the trails on Tlingit country between communities, and you try and build up wealth so you could buy a boat, and then you go faster, and you just sort of, I was talking with some students about it. I think it'd be a really fun game because you do it all in the language. Trade, get captured by a kushtika, whatever. But then also, like a part of this is being strategic and saying, okay, a lot of language revitalization has to do with reclaiming domains. Like we used to cut fish in the language, but we don't know how to do that anymore. We used to bead in the language, but not all of us know how to do that anymore. So what you do is you get all of the possible vocabulary. And you bring a fish in and someone's cutting the fish and you're working with your speakers saying, tell me what they're doing right now. Tell me how to say do that. What do you call this part of inside of the bloodline in the fish? What do you call this part? What's this fin called? How do you say throw that away? How do you say hold on to that, put it back in the ocean, because that's what we do. And then you build your activity. It doesn't have to be a book and not everything has to be, I guess, don't feel like it's got to be perfect in order to do it. Just do the thing, make the thing. But I guess I got a dual message there. But don't have your language materials always be lower quality than what's out there in the English-speaking world. Because I think, I've always thought about this. My kids got like such nice glossy books, and then our books were always like right off the printer, which is fine. But I always thought, especially when I went to Hawaii and I saw they used to just write on a Post-it note, tape it onto the book. But now they're making very high quality books. They've got young adult fiction. They've got it all. but you can also build yourself up to that point. I talked for a long time. Thoughts, questions?
What's your favorite type of publication to make?
Translating stories from elders. That's the hardest thing you could ever do.
Yeah.
And we have a Raven book we've been working on for 40 years. And it's so, I guess I like the challenge, but I don't know if it's my favorite, but I just love it because I feel like elders used to come, they used to see me sometimes and they'd say, I want to say something you can't understand. I just really love that. You know, they'd say, Ik kodek, I'm going to challenge you. So I'd be like, okay. And then they say something really hard. I was like, I don't know what that is. But then they always push me further and further and farther. And so, and I also, to be honest, I get very lonely for the elders I worked with a lot. Sitting right next to Nora Dowenhauer, sitting right across the table from George Davis and Marge Dudson, and just working on Susie James and working on Frank Italio and just trying to and it took 100 times to listen to it to hear what they were saying. But that pushed us collectively a little bit closer to where these ancestors were when there are so many speakers around who are at such a high level. So for me, that's kind of my favorite. But I also like making stuff with illustrations. I'll show you folks. We'll switch gears a little bit. So I was trying to think of this other approach to teaching stories. So this has to do with the story Tag. And I like doing this stuff too because, let me get rid of this thing. Sometimes I think I need an illustration that shows somebody dragging something. And it's not always easy to find. I'm going to show you folks some tips on how to get pictures of almost everything. Then I needed a picture for seeing somebody. So I would draw these myself. So I like illustrating stick figures and thinking how do you do I see you, I have seen you, which is what this verb means. And so I was trying to figure out, so I had this little eyeball here and this person was like, ding, oh yeah, and so I did this one the other day, which is clubbing something on the head, which is what that verb means. And so I couldn't find, I'm in the stock photo thing, clubbing on the head. I'm sure someone in their office was check on this guy, right? But yeah, that's what it means. And so just coming back and sort of looking at this stuff and throughout the remainder of the day, sometimes I'm going to give you these tips that are here's a little thing that kind of bothers me. So when you're showing people stuff and you got these little red underlines here, because the program is I think you spelled that wrong. You don't know how to spell my language, right? And so, although sometimes my phone is right, I was you're too smart, phone. But I think it is distracting to learners to see these red lines on things. So if you're working, there's usually ways in your preferences, or if you're working in Microsoft Word, it's also in preferences to go in and turn that off. So it's usually called, for this, it's under Edit, Spelling and Grammar, Check Spelling while typing. Little red line goes away. I think it's important if you're teaching actively, like I am. I left this on so I could show you to turn, I forgot. To make sure that that kind of stuff is off, because I do think that maybe there's some kind of subliminal effect, oh, they're doing it wrong, right? And mistakes happen. It's all okay. I think communication, if there's a fulcrum here and a little seesaw, and you got communication here and perfection over here, this is the heavy thing. Communication is the thing. That doesn't mean do it any old way. Marge Dudson, Shakshani, she used to tell me all the time, I don't just talk any old way. I know. what? Because she get really upset. You know, she's like, yeah, all fired up. But I just make sure I was like, I've not said anything, you know. So, but you would. So I'd say get it right as much as you can, but don't let the idea of getting it right stop you. Just go and build a supportive network where you love each other, you support each other, you're fascinated by what each other is doing, you're holding each other up. That breaks the mold of colonialization. To say we could do this ourselves, and we can support each other, we can love each other, we can love what each other is doing, we could use each other's stuff. That's the thing. The colonial side is this mine. You can't use it's mine. I get those emails. You're plagiarizing my work. I said, you are not an indigenous person to this language. You don't own anything here. I do recommend working with anyone who wants to work with you. But if you're dealing with some outside expertise, I think you should drop an agreement that says you will not claim anything that comes from our people. You will not tell any of our people to not work with the things that you make. You will not make fun of anybody who is working in this, and just have them sign it. I don't know what happens down the road, but I'm not the only one who gets these types of letters, who gets this hate mail from people who are like, you're doing it wrong and you can't use my stuff. And yeah, I tried to correspond respectfully with some of my colleagues about this, and some of the people I work with. And then sometimes it crosses the line. But for me, when it crosses the line, I say, okay, well, let's bring it out into the light. What if we made something where everybody could share? And, you know, like, I try to keep all of this stuff in a curriculum folder. I say, just go use it. You want an image of a swan? I got one. You want an image of a land otter? Be careful, but I got one. Okay, let's see. Yeah, okay, I could show you folks the Game Crafter site. I do have a game here, which I'm going to gift to Joel Isaac because he helps me come up with ideas. We're at a language conference 4 years ago, maybe, in New York City, and we're watching people give visual representations of their language, and we just kept thinking about ideas like a tree metaphor for like teaching the parts of the language. And so I'll show you folks some of this stuff a little bit later, but we have 15 more minutes. Let's dive into a few more things on print. And if you go to, let me see, hold on. Let me back up a second. So most of the stuff I do is on a blog, clinkitlanguage.com. This is what it looks like. There's a bunch of these sort of headings, and then there's these sub-menus underneath it. Learning Tlingit, if you want to watch classes that I teach, I record them all. I put them on YouTube. I link them to here, along with every handout that I distribute that day. But if you go all the way to the right, there's a tab for language revitalization. And then here is the slideshow that I'm using today. So if you want it, the whole thing is right there. And there's these three terms I think are kind of important: standardization, graphization, and modernization. So what that means is standardizing the way you write the language. When we hear this sound, how do we write it? If we've, which dialect are we going to usually teach from? Is there a main one and then you teach the others? You try to get them all in there? Are there certain dialects that aren't spoken anymore, and are you going to leave those ones out? Like, those are all decisions to be made by you folks. But something should emerge as like the common way to do it so that you can have general consensus in the language, and then you go forward. So as I've learned more about dialects, I try to include that stuff in the materials that I create. Graphization is like, what's your writing system? How do you deal with this thing? How do you deal with that thing? Do you have 2 or 3 different writing systems? Can you get to one? Does it make sense to get to one? Is the fight too entrenched? And you might have to just have 2. Then modernization is, how does the language maintain itself? You're just going to need, we've had all kinds of stuff we've had to figure out. Microwave oven, electric sockets, you know, a whole bunch of stuff. And so sometimes we need a new word for something. As far as I know, we didn't have a verb for skiing or skating. So we've had to sort of cook some of that stuff up. Kiti and I birthed the verb for texting, right? So we got a verb for that now. It's thumb talking. So those are things you're just going to have to sort of keep an eye on. Some languages do like a whole committee. You've got a whole process, and that can work. But then sometimes you need an answer right now. You know, and so those are some things to figure, and then you might have to call it one thing and then adjust it later. I don't know. Okay. Yeah, and cursive and print. Yeah, so writing, so fonts. We'll also talk about fonts. Okay, let's see. All right.
I have a quick question about dictionary, if I could, real quick, about coining words, coining new words. And so as they kind of come about and our new words come up from lots of different places, lots of different sources, right? From lots of different people. You mentioned it a little bit earlier, like how do we get that into a new place so that other people can then keep using it? Is there, what's the standard place to put that information to, or to like who houses that collection of, and maybe it's you in part, but probably not solely you. So how does it get spread to the others? And then also when you have a PDF dictionary printed off, then like if you go back and say, okay, we added these new 6 words, then that you have to keep redoing another PDF and downloading another PDF. So it's kind of like version 22, version 22.4, you know what I mean? So to keep that up so that you're always knowing which ones are current, and how do you get that information into the dictionary if it's coined by some group or people? Does that make sense, those things?
Yes, it does make sense. So I do have a dictionary that I've been working on for years now. And so one of the things that I do put on here is the date. So this was updated in October 15th, 2021. So that's one thing you go to, is I could say, oh, do you have the March 17th, 2022 version? Because that's the one with the word for whatever the thing is. So I do recommend having a committee of sorts. So like we have an informal committee process for developing new words. So there's quite a few of us who we know how new words are made historically, and then we consult with elders to say, what do you think of this? And then they'll give us some adjustments. And I think it's good to come to consensus. We got 3 words for mayonnaise because we couldn't decide which one it should be. And like just pick one or have some process of voting. So Hawaii it's called a Lexicon Committee. And so basically you can propose a new word, they'll take it to the committee and then vote it up or down, or maybe they'll change it. You can also make a request to them, say, we need a word for hot sauce, help us out. And so these are some things that I think need to be formalized a little bit in the Tlingit community. So typically people, if I hear about it, I'll work with elders, produce a new word, share it with folks who are asking, and in our classes, and then I'll put it in here. And so I do think having a small group that's kind of in charge of doing that is smart, or else you're going to end up with 10 different words for things, or but then also to have a way to communicate that out, because maybe there could be a newsletter that's like the new words of this quarter, the new words of this month, the new words of this year, so that we can sort of keep that running as well. So folks can say, yeah, I was wondering what that was. And then have a bit of a process to say, you need a word for something, contact the committee and we'll cook it up. Okay. Okay. All right.
Someone has their hand up.
Oh, yeah, is there another question?
Yeah, I just wanted to add on to this conversation about new words. I just wanted to say that dictionaries, they're meant to grow by the speech community. So once a word becomes salient within a speech community, then it can be added to a dictionary. And so what I'm trying to say is that it doesn't have to be in a dictionary. It's nice for it to be in a dictionary. But once new words are coined and they catch on, I think this is a sign of a really healthy speech community. And I think that's something that we should probably talk about too, is, for example, with the French language has a committee on this as well. But people who are French speakers, they don't go to this committee and say, is this a word? Like people will just speak, right?
Right.
So this is something that I think we need to add to the conversation, is that it's completely okay for you to code switch from English to Tlingit or any other language. This is a completely fine way of communicating. And so I just wanted to add this to the conversation as well. Once you are using a word within your own speech community, that in and of itself becomes part of the lexicon. And this is a normal linguistic phenomenon.
Yeah, wonderful. And I think it's good to have if you're learning enough of the language that you could come up with words for things, I think it's really exciting as well. So we have a bunch of different new words that a bunch of different people have come up with. Because I said, oh, I was thinking about what should I call this? And I thought maybe this. I was like, that sounds really great. And so, and I think it empowers your language community to have ownership of their language rather than, because forming a committee, I think, is really good, but I think also as long as the process doesn't slow you down, because sometimes it could become this bureaucratic process, like, hey, we need a word for toaster. It's like, okay, fill out this form and make your request, and we'll send it to the committee, and then we meet every 4 months. So it's like, it could become something that's just overly processed. And yeah, I do think it should be a naturalized thing to talk about that. And then to just have the dictionary is just there to sort of say, here it is for future generations. Because I've also seen one of the dangers of doing a dictionary might get people mad at you. I will say that. It probably, very likely, definitely will get some people mad at you. I also think some folks take a dictionary, like I've been in sessions, language sessions, where someone asks an elder what a word for something is, and they tell us what the word is. And someone says, well, in the dictionary it says it's this. I'm like, what are you doing? And so also to realize like a dictionary is just a tool. It is not the thing, right? And so like I was arguing with somebody online about like something, and they're like, well, what is the dictionary? So it's like, well, who wrote it, right? So yeah, keep it, it's a tool, but it's also something that should be, I think, in the hands of the Indigenous community. I saw another hand up.
Could I make a comment?
Oh.
Go ahead.
Our ancestors, when they looked at things that whatever it reminded them of in their own environment, then they came up with a name. It's like Atesh. That is a pitcher. And so, you know, that you put water in or juice in and then you pour it into a cup. So that is how we created new words, by what it reminded us of in our own environment. You know, and I kind of, you know, think that when we begin identifying things of the new world that we live in, and we do have to do so, but I think sometimes we're identifying tools that the Western culture has. So what is that doing with us in our minds? You know, we need to look back, see some of the things of our ancestors and how they named things or what things were named, and how we can relate some things that in the new world to that particular item that we may have already, that may look like. So I just wanted to add that, and I thank you for answering me.
Sheesh.
And I wanted to also add to that one is, this is Jenna, that, for instance, like an EOC is something like the modern helicopter is the same, was named the same word as like a dragonfly.
Wow.
So that's the reminder.
Thank you. Good as cheese. Okay, a couple quick things before our lunch break. We'll take an hour, lunch on your own, and then we'll pick back up where we left off. And I'll show you folks some examples of stuff that we've made here. I do think an indigenous controlled method, like again, it comes back to this. It's a negotiation. What makes sense for your language and what also helps you keep track of all. Languages are complicated things. There's a lot of parts to it. Documenting it in a way that makes sense for your people, go for it. I think it should include detailed descriptions of culturally important concepts. Like there are some things in the older dictionaries when you look it up, says, this means good luck. I was like, no, it doesn't. It's more complicated, way more complicated. Take the time, write it out. Or else people are going to be saying something, they're going to be saying, they think they're saying, oh darn, in a fun way, but they're saying, oh my goodness, in the way of a tragedy, right? Just help them out. Like, and then there's a bunch of cultural concepts that are just deeply embedded cultural information. Now, I got this idea from Zeosh James Crippen, who was working on, he was calling it like an encyclopedic dictionary, I think he was calling it. So if you've got things like there's certain animals that probably are very important culturally, explain it and do it in a very short way. You don't have to write like a whole novel about how this thing works. But, you know, and I also get this idea talking with Kingisi, David Katzik, one of our elders who's now an ancestor. He was just saying, like, when I look this up in the dictionary, that's not what this thing is. I said, well, tell me what it is, and I'll try to write it down. So that's also some of the work that could be done. I think keeping it up to date, having new words, it's very fun. I think it's fun to come up with new words. Elevator, we did that one. We did, you know, the light socket, electric socket. We did a whole bunch of, I think it's just really fun. There's also an elder, every time I see him, he's got a new one. He's like, what are we going to call penguin? This is Hintakyan Dakingao. It's like, oh, a duck that flies underwater. That sounds great. So, you know, and so like you're going to have some elders who really love doing this kind of stuff too. I would say keep it relevant to however you're teaching the language. Keep it straightforward. Don't censor it. I don't know. You know, one of the dictionaries that we had is wonderful. And I'm so thankful that Constance Nash and Jillian Story made the Tlingit Verb Dictionary. I got to have a phone conversation with them and I said, could I use the stuff that's in there to make a new one? And I love their answer because they said, it's your language. We were just visiting. Do whatever you guys want with your language, right? But they were so nice, so kind. But for whatever reason, they were missionaries, and it was a different era. I don't know. But I was talking to one of my teachers. He said, that dictionary got all the verbs. I said, no, it didn't. Beautiful, but it didn't get all the verbs. He said, what didn't it get? I said, well, I can't poop, I can't pee, I can't make more people. And I could tell you how to do all those things because I talked to my aunties and uncles about it. So I think also like figure out how those things are talked about in your language as well. Put them in there. Like, don't worry about it. And then have a backup plan for, like, what if your computer crashes? What if something happens? What if, don't lose all the data and don't let someone leave your community and take it with them. So have a plan. Also, if you've got one person who's doing all this stuff, have a plan. Like, what if something happens to them? Make sure that there's a way to hand that off to someone else. To say, here's all the stuff. All my stuff is on the university. Like the university has a bunch of my stuff right now. But then there's a bunch of stuff on this computer too. I think about that stuff all the time. And so like, I have a plan. If something happens to me, it's going to go to this person. And then generally, if people ask me for the originals, I'll give it to them. Like these workbooks, these other stuff, like you want to use that as a template, go for it. If it helps you, do it. I got illustrations of all kinds of concepts. If you say, hey, we're trying to get an illustration for, we got this verb that means to lift up a dead thing or a sleeping baby. It's like, oh, okay, I could probably do that. And like we can brainstorm and come up with ideas. But now it's reading into our lunchtime. Let's take a break. We will come back at 1:30. Thanks, Cheesh. We'll keep going. We are back. Go to Cheesh. So we left off talking about dictionaries. The next thing is a workbook. But anybody have any thoughts, questions, anything else about the dictionary conversation? I'll show you some examples. I'll show you folks the software that I'm currently using. Okay. Oh yeah, they're walking. Okay, so the next sort of thing are workbooks. So I think once you have your teaching methodologies established, and it could be a whole bunch of stuff. Maybe you're into total physical response or TPR storytelling, or if you're doing where are your keys, or if you're doing what is it, accelerated second language acquisition, or you're looking at the Paul Creek methods, like whatever you're doing, your curriculum should reflect it. And I think you should be doing lots of, just incorporate everything that works. If you're doing early childhood, there's Montessori method, there's Waldorf method, you could do hybrid, do whatever works for you. I don't think you kind of pick one thing and go with it. I think you pick lots of things. Your curriculum should reflect that methodology. And then you should also continue to sort of figure out, like, is this something people write in? Is this something people look at and then they write it on their own? The workbooks we used in Hawaii, we just wrote in the books. But then I was like, well, I want to keep this as a momentum, so I would write on a computer or something. So, and it doesn't have to be one thing. You could have multiple options. But I think your visual should be pretty consistent, high quality images. If you're going to publish it, they should be royalty-free images. So not just anything that you find on the internet, but if it's from, oh, let me let folks in.
Sorry, got him.
Oh, you got 'em? Okay. If it's from a government website like the National Park Service, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, like you can use those photos. Otherwise, I recommend using stock images that you purchase. You sort of purchase a subscription plan, and then you could go and use those, and they're royalty free. You could use them. There are some.
That's Marsha.
Oh, Did you have a question, Koneoti?
No, I just really want to make a comment because I was working with an organization in the past, and one of our helpers utilized a Fish and Game off of the state web, a photo. And actually, we really can't use their stuff unless it's really like, even though they said we could, the photo that was pulled was an actual photo. And then the photographer that Fish and Game paid, that photographer came back. It was only for the use of that particular project. So just be careful. I speak from experience.
Yeesh. Yeah, I would say take it yourself or use something like a stock photo, I think is your best option, because then, but then sometimes if you have particular berries or foods that you make, take a picture of it yourself, you know. And so, but these are some things to think about. And then what's the image going to be for soap berries, and what's the image, and you know, and you can certainly use a lot, but I think having a single image that repeats through your curriculum is effective, because it sort of, I think it does something to just do this sound image association, so that once you hear that, you think of this thing. And it's so I try to limit, you know, not having a different picture of the salmon every single time, like but have the same salmon photo. And some things are hard to find pictures of, so then also figure, you know, the thing that I had the hardest time finding a picture of was a pull tab. And so I was like looking on the internet, I was like, well, those don't really look like it. And I think maybe to keep people from sort of making fake ones or something, that there's just not a lot of pictures that I could find out there. And so I just went to a pull tab place and I said, and I just bought some. And then I was gonna leave and they said, you can't take those. You gotta rip them here. I was like, I don't know how this stuff works. And then I said, you know, you can't leave with it. You gotta rip them. So I did. And I was gonna take a picture. I said, you can't take a picture of that. And I said, well, okay, I'm trying to make curriculum for Tlingit language. I just want a picture of one to put in a workbook. And she said, oh, that? Okay, take some, take them home. Just take them out of the trash. And then she just let me take them home. So it was really interesting. And maybe I broke the law there. I don't know. Any of that stuff works. But I think the visuals are good because, yeah, I know another group. It doesn't always end this way. Sometimes it does end with people getting really upset and there's legal claims and compensation. But there was a group I was doing some work with, and there's a photographer who recognized their work. It was being used without their permission, came in very upset. And then they said, okay, well, what do you want? Can we pay you for it? We're sorry. And he was in their office. He's like, I really like that potted plant. Can I take that? I said, yeah. And so he walked out with a plant. You know, and sometimes it does end with legal recourse, or you know, you might have to pay someone. But then you might have other images that are, we have a phrase, which is, I am wet. That is not a safe image search if you're sort of trying to find a picture of something. And so I ended up finding an artist who made these little people out of cardboard boxes, very cute. And they had one that was just standing in the rain. So I bought that from the artist. And so I'm using this for language curriculum. And they thought it was really neat. So it's a combination of things. But if you go, so I do have, I'll show you folks something as we're talking about this. So going back to clinkitlanguage.com, if you click on curriculum, there's a Google folder here that says Tlingit curriculum. That is everything I've ever collected or created in the language, and every image that I use to create language materials goes in here. So if you, like, trying to think of, like, if you had potentially 10,000 items for your language, which is, there's 11,000 things in this folder. How are you going to organize them? And it's kind of up to you. Mine are somewhat a little all over the place, but here's like biblical stuff, because we have whole chapters of the Bible, body parts, board games, So this board game here is in here. Handouts, different organizations like Children of the Taku Society, Carcross Tagish First Nations. And then if you go down, there's language, images, and illustrations. So I have this by, if there's groups for like maybe that could be used, maybe not. So I have it organized by like who might own those things. And then this one are things that I've made. And then if you go down, I have stock illustrations, stock images, my art, my illustrations, my images. And that's where most of the stuff is that I use for all of the workbooks that I create. I think there is one up here specifically for the beginning Tlingit workbook. So if you're using that workbook and you want to create a slideshow or flashcards or whatever, all the images should be in there. And then if you're looking for something, like if you reached out to me and said, hey, I'm looking for a picture of some kind of bird, like I want a picture of a ptarmigan. So then what I would do is if I got that for you, I would just drop it into here. And then you'd have to scroll down pretty far, but we'll just do a bullhead. We'll do a brown bear, I guess.
Did you start the recording again, Funni?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you for the reminder.
It is recording already.
Oh, if you're looking for cologne. This is, I have one on there that says Atkan Hiti. So you smell like a smokehouse. 'Cause I thought that was funny. But then these are in there. Use them. If you want them, use them. Scroll through it, check it out. If you're looking for a picture of something, I'd be happy to go take a look and then I could put it in here. And then there are folks who do share photos with me as well. And to make sure that we're giving them credit if we need to, they're usually in here under their, like Planet Alaska is a group that does a tremendous amount of advocacy for Indigenous rights, Indigenous knowledge, traditional medicines. And so they are under here. And then, yeah, okay. I would also recommend, let's see, let me just, yeah, there are Creative Commons, so you can find stuff sometimes through Wikipedia, but you gotta, if you find an image on Wikipedia, you gotta take a look at it. It shows you the rights usage for it. You can do image searches where you can select free and open use, so you can go find things that are shareable, that can be used. And then some of them, they just want to have a photo credit on there. So let's say you find a really good image of some particular thing and you're having a hard time finding a different one. Sometimes you just need to credit that person, and you could do it either on the page or you could do it in the beginning. So if we looked at, for example, make sure I have it open. So if we look at the current version of the beginning Tlingit workbook, I think on the title page, it does say images in text, and then you credit folks who have taken images. And you could put specifically which ones are there, or you could put it on the page itself. My preference is to put it sort of in this part of the text so that when we're learning the language, we're just focusing on the language and people's names and organizations aren't necessarily popping up. Okay. Yeah.
If folks work on like communicative activities or dialogue activities that are related to the workbook, like maybe as part of a school district in service or something, is there a place for them to put that in the Google Drive so that like for lesson one or whatever they're reviewing?
Yeah, if people are making stuff, like they could send it to me. Like if you're making slideshows, you can send it to me. I'll put it in here and I could put it under, because the other tricky part is like running a blog that links. The idea is the blog is the visual interface to the Google folder and the YouTube channel. So that everything, you can link to everything through there. But it takes a lot. I've got like probably 1,000 broken links on there, and you know, there's a whole bunch of like it is a challenge to keep this stuff going. I do think there's a pretty good system going right now, but in terms of like, if you had 500 curriculum items, how are you going to keep track of that? So generally, I've got the resources in sort of two general sort of organizational structures. One of them goes beginning, intermediate, advanced. And the other one goes early childhood, elementary school, middle school, high school, college, right? And so, and then like language in the home and stuff like that. But just in terms of like making sure you've got a good concept of that stuff so that you can start to have an organizational system so that it can be found. But yeah. What's that?
And others could borrow.
Yeah, and others could borrow. And people ask me, they say, can I use it? I was like, just use them. Don't ask, just use them. Make stuff. But also, one of the goals, which is kind of a tricky thing, because you know there's a lot of people doing a lot of stuff, which is wonderful, but you don't really want people to do stuff that's already been done. Because like, no, you don't have to duplicate it because we already have that. So also trying to sort of communicate, like, you want a colors poster? We've got it. You want this kind of thing? We got it. And so trying to figure out like what things do we not have and how do we fill those gaps? And yeah, those are free use. Ooh, I'm looking at this picture that Waki sent. Yeah, and so this is a really good point. I see a hand up is not everybody does their fish the same, right? So you might have a word like utchi, which is boiled fish. Then you got a picture of salmon chowder. And it's not the same thing, right? Or you might have, you know, and so trying to get some things and making sure, and some of this stuff gets a little tricky too, like this is that type of berry. This is, you know, you got a whole bunch of different huckleberries, a whole bunch of different currants, you got a whole bunch of different cranberry type things, and making sure you're getting clarity on which one is specifically which. There's also times where I've used the wrong image for like that. It looked like that thing to me, but then it wasn't. And when someone pointed out, I was like shocked that I didn't notice that. So goodness cheese for sharing. And I saw a hand up. Someone have a thought or a question?
Yeah. What do you think about digital flashcards and possibility of creating flashcards for others?
Yeah, I think it's great. I think there's quite a few that are already made in Quizlet.
Oh, okay.
Some
What
folks,
about Anki? What do you think of them?
I think Anki is really good if folks are using it. I know.
Yeah, I think it can be difficult to figure out.
What's that?
I think it can be a bit difficult to figure out, but I find it faster and more convenient than the other ones once you figure it out. But to each their own. Quizlet seems good too.
I think there's stuff on Quizlet. I'd be interested in seeing stuff on Anki. I think there's stuff on Kahoot. Someone put that in the chat as well. And just also, like, that's probably another thing that needs to be added to clinkitlanguage.com is linking off to some of these study materials that are out there, Flipgrid. Yeah, awesome.
Actually, one more thing. Could I ask one more thing? Or are we too busy? Oh, cool. What do you think about creating flashcards for other things besides vocabulary? Like, for instance, like how to combine different prefixes and suffixes and so forth. I feel like that's something that gets overlooked.
Yeah, I think that'd be great. Like in terms of like just
Okay.
dealing with changing it for person perhaps, or I think all that would be really useful.
Yeah.
Thanks, Cheesh.
Okay, cool. Yeah, there's so many rules for contractions, combinations, and Plinkett and the others, so as something that can be hard to remember.
Right. Yeah, I'm all for it.
All right, thank you.
Another thought or question?
I have a question. What if, like you don't have access to a Google file? Is there another option?
There's drop. I mean, so it's a really good question because like UAS has an agreement with Google, and if that were to like sort of this, if UAS said, we're done with Google, done. I don't know what I'd do because I've got probably a terabyte of stuff just sitting in this Google folder. They've never told me to stop filling stuff, so I just keep filling it. So I've got hundreds of hours of audio on there. I've got probably 100 hours of video on there. I've got images, folders, and stuff is backed up in other places as well. But I would probably try, I think an agreement with the university is really helpful because you usually have access to these storage locations. Otherwise, like who's going to be paying for that? And there is this other question too about who has the right to hold on to all of this stuff? And it's a tricky question, right? And so I just went ahead and did it. I was like, I'm not trying to make any money off of this. Those are free sites. Those are free for use. But I know folks are having trouble tracking down the De Laguna recordings and having trouble like finding this book that's out of print or having, and I just saw the benefit of having all of this stuff basically at your fingertips. And so I just went ahead and did it. But then there's been discussions as well that some folks have said, well, not everything's for everybody. And someone got really mad at me and said, you put this story out there and it's a sacred story. That hurts my feelings. And I said, well, I asked that elder if he wanted to tell it to everybody, and he said yes. So he said it was okay. But then there's other stuff too, where I've got these sort of approaches to some of this stuff that maybe not everybody agrees with. But for me, if I look around and I say, okay, how many people could just speak our language right now? Like just full on speak our language. And it's probably getting down to close to 20 to 30. And I've been watching that go down and down and down. So at some point I say, well, what if we just took the lid off of everything, took the doors off of everything, and just tried to see what would happen? Then I think you can make decisions as a community to say, this thing is really important for folks to have access to it, but maybe we don't translate it out there. So maybe there's ways to do some of that stuff. But I tend to lean towards just share it all, make it available. The needs for the language community outweigh potential risks for exploitation. If it's not translated, that's pretty solid encryption, and so like got some recording that's only in Tlingit, nobody's gonna be able to really do anything with it. But if you didn't have a Google folder, like there's like Dropbox is an option, but just in terms of creating something that has wide open access, I think it's pretty hard to beat that. But you could do it yourself too. You could do your own server on a website, and then you could still access it that way. Okay. I think our EAC language community, do you folks have?
Hi. So we're in the middle of developing language learning on and using PowerPoint. And it's been really good because we kind of joined in on the real technological side that happened about 8 years ago, 9 years ago. And so we got over our heads, and then the technology changed and you had to update everything. And then it kind of, it was good. It was a good start, but now we're going back to what is basic, easy, and teachable and for language learners. What I'm running into, now we have two different drawers here. One, we are archiving a lot of our documents and things like that because we fell behind on that and trying to develop all this stuff. So we're in the midst of a kind of a formal archiving process. And now the other thing we're running into with the e-learning lessons is where can we store or find a platform for our curriculum that has animation and is interactive as well, and where could we put that someplace that is accessible to the EAC community, especially, but beyond as well, for all kinds of things, downloadables, stories with interactive elements to them, and as well as the animation.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I would say EAC is right at the northwestern part of Southeast Alaska. So if you folks wanted to work with UAS, we'd be happy to house that for you. And I'd be happy to work with you folks to create this whole blog structure that we have for Shinget. We're trying to do it for Haida. We're trying to do it for Simshan as well.
Yeah, I've been asking for that because there's only a small handful of us working on this. So thank you.
Yeah, so I mean, as long as you guys were okay, like we'd be happy to do that because
that we're kind of on the border of everything. So it's like, are we, I mean, when I was working with Alaska Native Heritage Center, I identified as Southeast. However, we're in an area, as you might know already, that is a Lutic, populated mostly. We're the minority, and so we haven't had much of a say until we joined forces with some of our, or shared with some of our Southeast friends. So we still are kind of feeling like where do we belong, or how can we get help or support?
when Michael Krauss gave a keynote here a few years ago, he told us we're all EAC anyways and not Shinget. So.
We are all the people, yeah.
We're related, yeah, but we'll certainly respect your folks' linguistic sovereignty. But we could just do it too. I mean, I'd be happy. Basically, I would just create a folder that says EAC curriculum, and then I'll share it with you folks. And just to be transparent, usually with these curriculum joint ventures, there's a small group of people that have editorial privileges. Just because you don't want someone to accidentally delete something, move something, because that can happen. But then you share viewing privileges with everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's kind of the way I think these things can run. And then you develop a blog that really helps. Because sometimes if you've got something with 100 folders, and then there's folders within those folders, it can just feel messy. But then to develop a blog that really just it just contains links to the Google folder. Like that's basically what we have for the Tlingit language right now. And there's certainly lots of other stuff on other websites and with other groups that are doing stuff. And so, yeah, I'd be happy to chat with you folks about that if you want to reach out.
Okay, thank you.
And if other folks are out there, not especially with languages in Alaska, if you are not sure where to put stuff, I'll be happy to chat with you folks. They haven't told me it's unlimited, but they haven't told me it's limited either. So I'll just keep dumping things in the container and see what happens. But I think generally, as far as languages go, a lot of our folks in IT understand what the situation is with highly endangered languages. And so I think they're happy to sort of work with us and figure out what we can do. Okay. I think coming back to a workbook, I think it should also include dialogue exercises that demonstrate some of the concepts. So if you're talking about kinship and you're teaching kinship, start it off with a conversation about like, oh, where's your auntie? Oh, you know, I was thinking about your grandma, and these things are really interesting. I was talking to Dr. William Wilson, who I call Pila Wilson, in Hawaii, and they were using these dialogue exercises with children who, well, they were young adults who grew up in the Hawaiian language movement. So they've been speaking Hawaiian their whole life. And they do these dialogue exercises. They said, people don't talk like this, you know. And so trying to figure out like natural conversation as much as possible that also fulfills, you know, if you're talking about seasons and what kinds of things might people talk about. But I think a whole series of dialogues is really helpful. And also, I was thinking about this as well, just having these topical sort of things that are also having these something for beginners, something for intermediate, something for advanced. For example, the beginning conversation could be, hey, I hit a big at bingo last night. Oh, that's great. What are you going to do? Well, I think I'm going to buy a TV. Oh, wow, that's really neat. Let's watch this show. Or whatever. It's like a short conversation, right? Pretty straightforward. Then maybe the intermediate one is, hey, I hit a big at bingo. Hey, that's great. You going to pay me back that money you borrowed? Well, I want to get a TV. Okay, well, maybe there's some way you can get the TV and pay me back some of that money you borrowed. So it's a little bit more, there's a little bit more richness to it in terms of, but it's still a similar sort of topic. And then I would say hands-on work, like, so I'm still trying to find this balance between what I'm teaching and what I'm assigning folks to do. It's like, go do these things that have to do with that. Translate these concepts. Come up with something that shows this. If we're talking about kinship, maybe we have a family tree exercise or something, but also keep in mind that you might have people who get uncomfortable because everybody's family has, I mean, you're going to be exposing them in some levels, like, I didn't know my father, or I was adopted, or, you know, there's all kinds of stuff that could go into there, and it could introduce trauma, and it could also introduce just nervousness that's already there with just trying to learn the language, speak the language. So just be gentle, be patient, be kind, and also be supportive. And just always give people, say, we're doing this. Nobody has to. If you're not uncomfortable with it, with the certain types of information, just skip it, you know. But also, for me, there's always a bit of a balancing act as well between folks who are showing up and not doing the work, and then folks who are showing up and doing the work, and just trying to figure out how to navigate that kind of stuff. Because Noah Dowenhauer and Richard Dowenhauer talked about this quite a bit. They said they noticed a thing where someone might come in and say, I am ethnically connected to this language. Once I come in the room, it will flow through me, and the wind will blow, and the birds will sing. And then it's like, it's very hard. And then it takes so much work, and it takes, you know, and again, everything is a balancing act, because you don't want to come out and say, it's so hard, you got to work. And you don't want to like give people this sort of label of being lazy or not caring. At the same time, you have to keep an eye out for folks that might be just sort of only doing the minimum, but maybe that's all they could do right now. But then if you're going to have sort of courses at a university that are supposed to go beginning, intermediate, advanced, you might have to push some people through, but you might have to make some hard decisions about how do you get people to increase their motivation without trying to guilt them or shame them or make them feel uncomfortable. Always tough. Okay. Did you folks have another thought or question? Okay. I'll try and be fast with these so we get to the examples. So a grammar. Find an effective way of documenting the way the language works, including naming the components, how they function, what they do. It doesn't have to comply with linguistics, but it should be consistent. And it might be frustrating too, because you might have learners that 10 years ago they called it this thing, now they call it this thing. And you know, that just might be part of what you're going through as a language. The language itself goes through these changes as you develop more and more second language learners, and you might be dealing with burst speakers. And then you also have to really stress to your second language learners that just because you know what this component is called doesn't mean you know more than someone who grew up with the language. Know what you're supposed to do in certain situations. If you're talking with your auntie and uncle who didn't learn it as a second language, you don't have to ask them about pronouns and suffixes and, you know, oh, are you changing the conjugation prefix? Like, you don't talk to them through this language of linguistics, but try to just communicate with them. And as much as you can, get them to keep talking to you. Get them to keep talking because they know the language. It's naturalized within them. It's the patterns are there. The rhythm is there. And that's your goal with them. And then sometimes your goal with each other is figure out where you all are in, like the structural method of learning, the use of the language, this sort of the things that you can't document every part of a language. You know, there are just certain things that are just naturally just sort of there. And then include examples of whole language, right? Get stories in there, get speeches in there that, again, come back. If you're teaching body parts, well, then there's this part of the Duktut story where he washed the 8 major joints, and what are those joints? And, you know, and sort of coming back and tying these things together.
Pune, can you speak about latent speakers also?
Yes. We have adopted this terminology over time. We used to say latent speakers, we used to say silent speakers. I think we're leaning towards fluent understanders these days. But there are people who grew up with the language and they can understand it. And they can also tell you when you're not quite saying something correctly, but they do have a difficult time producing the language. Some of it is linked to traumatic experiences of being abused for speaking the language, having the language kept from you in certain ways. A tremendous, like, however much racism on a day-to-day basis folks are going through right now, it grows exponentially when you go back generations. That's just how it works. So a lot of language communities, I think you're going to have to envision who are you doing this for and what is your method and your approach. If you're doing a language nest, your goal is to create a home where the language happens to be your Indigenous language. That's the whole medium of communication. You're just trying to talk to these kids, these little babies, all day long. And so it's not really, I mean, curriculum is not the most important thing. The most important thing is having a group of people who will do that with the kids. Even when some kids saying, I don't know what you're saying. Have faith that they will figure it out. And it works. You take a kid and you plop them into a functioning language nest. Come check on that kid in 3, well, don't just leave your kid, but in 3 months, that child will be speaking and understanding the language. I've seen it, and I know that it works. But that's a different thing than taking adult learners. And then even if you take adult learners, you're going to have folks who've never heard a word of Tlingit in their life. They just think it sounds neat to learn. You have some folks who grew up with it, so they know a few things. They know a whole bunch of things, like they tell you how to scram and be quiet and all these different things. Then you have people who grew up and they can understand. Like, I know all kinds of people. I stood in this room talking Tlingit, and I could hear Helen Watkins translating to her husband with tremendous accuracy. And I was kind of distracted. I was like, whoa, I better be careful what I say, you know. But I think unlocking the language for some of these folks is something we haven't quite figured out yet. Because it's not always the highly structured approach like we would take with, let's start with the noun and how to make this sound and how to do that. And so I think we're still figuring that out. And I think most language communities are probably in the same situation. Because I also sat in a room with a family called me and they said, my grandma is going to pass away and she only is speaking Tlingit right now. We can't talk to her. Can you come talk to her? I said, yes, I'll come talk to her. It was really intense to try and communicate with her, and just knowing a whole bunch of stuff was on the line. But a lot of the family members were in the room, and someone was translating everything I was saying and everything she was saying to everybody else. And I wasn't trying to shame them or say anything bad, but I was thinking, you're so close to speaking. Like you could translate, but you won't talk to someone even when they're getting ready to pass away. But that's how strong sometimes the barriers are, the trauma is. I think we should have trauma-informed approaches that are looking at this stuff, that are trying to find ways to just be incredibly safe, I think you should have clear times when nobody is correcting anybody. You just say, no, corrections are not allowed right now, and that might drive some people nuts. They might think you're just doing it really haphazardly. But if you can create some of those, not the whole time, but just say, you know what, we're creating a safety zone. Nobody's switching to English, and nobody's going to correct anybody, and let's just see what happens. And then if you can start, because I think about this stuff a lot, because I've talked to folks who know the language, but they say, once I start talking, I could just feel my throat closing. And this other person said, no, that person's there from boarding school. They're just going to hit me. Once I start talking, I just feel it. Okay, I saw a hand up. Somebody have a thought?
Yeah, I wanted to add to this conversation too, that this is also a phenomenon that happens with immigrant families that come into another country. Often the children will be fluent speakers of these immigrant families, but their children will often be these fluent understanders. And there are programs that do exist within like university settings for these heritage speakers of languages. And I think that would be also maybe something we can look into, understanding how these programs are created, because they have such a high capacity of language, but the active process of producing language is what is the question. So I think that would be really interesting to look into, if that is something that these fluent understanders would want. I think them wanting it is also something that we need to ask them if they want to be speakers, because that is a lot of trauma that we're all talking about here. And just to go into that a little bit deeper, when we are learning our Indigenous languages, this is a healing process. This is something that we all are on the journey of healing, but healing from what? And this is the trauma of colonization, all these systematic ways of oppressing Indigenous people. So when we do learn our language and our culture, we're on that journey of healing. And it's going to be an individual process, and it's also going to be a community process as well. So if somebody chooses not to be a speaker, I think that's something that we should respect, but also encourage them to look at it in a different way. But to respect people in that way as well. So I just wanted to add that.
Goodness, sheesh. Yeah, and there's a lot of complexities here. So a related concept is you're going to hear a lot of folks who would say, I would love to, but I really want to, but then you might not see them whenever it comes time to really start learning and using the language. And I do think there's something there that they're expressing it, but then they're also hesitant to sort of fully make that commitment, which is something that's certainly worth thinking about, talking about, creating more of these healing opportunities. Like we had a language session a few years ago, and we divided into like a men's group and a women's group, specifically to say, what do we need to overcome? And I'll just tell you, in the men's group, there was a lot of people yelling at each other, and it was traumatic, and it was horrible. Like to the point where someone saw someone, they said, "Oh, Khane got beat up in the men's room," and they're like, "He's in the bathroom," and someone like physically assaulted him. They're like, "No, but what really happened was really pretty." I mean, it's recorded. You can watch it if you want to. It's but it was also, it shows you that it's showing you the symptoms of the group, and so there's a lot of stuff that's going to happen that some people might not like, and some people might get uncomfortable with. But I felt like we kept looking at this trauma, and then the trauma emerged. And that's you dealing with scary monsters. You're dealing with the aftermath and the current effects of colonization and genocide, which sometimes is going to be really tough to deal with. But that's when I think you rely on some of your ceremonies, and you maybe start to incorporate new things that you think people need that are informed by the ways that ceremonies are held, so that people can begin to let go of some of this stuff. Because I also think that the language is the medicine. And I know I advocate all the time for people to learn our language, use our language, come to our language. And plenty of people come up and talk to me. I've heard all kinds of stuff. Like at the same session, they gave me the job of, can you stop people when they switch to English because we're trying to stay in the language? Which is never a fun job. So I just kept saying, we'd love to hear what you have to say, but if you cannot say it in Tlingit, we're going to have to ask you just to wait, because we had the largest gathering of Tlingit speakers that maybe we'll have it for another, maybe in 20 years from now, we'll get back up to where we were. Maybe 10, I don't know. But someone came up to me and they said, and they were very angry. And they said, you know what they did to us in the boarding schools? I says, yes, I know. I've heard. I wasn't there, but I certainly have been documenting what I can about it. And this person said, you're doing that to us right now. And I said, well, I hear you. I understand what you're saying. I don't agree, because I'm trying to keep us in our language right now and keep English from taking over. Because once you let it in, it's going to take over. But I hear you. And so there's a lot of pain, there's a lot of trauma, and I think another thing that I believe is we need to keep having workshops like this that are Indigenous centered and that are focused on these things. And maybe we need to start sharing some ideas on how we're all individually dealing with this. Because I usually tell people, I say, well, if you don't speak the language now and you want to, you can. You just have to change your life and change everything you do. Not like every single thing, but if you've got to make room for it in your life, and you've also have to be around other people who are using the language. Geez, folks, for sharing. Okay, we're almost to the examples. So literature, stories and speech making. I'm really trying this graduated process. I'll be sharing it with some of the Tlingit language folks. And I'll be happy to share it with you folks as well. So basically taking a full recording of a story, transcribing it, translating it. So transcribing means you write it down in the Indigenous language. Translate is you say, this is what it is in English. Lots and lots of decisions to be made. Who are you translating this for? What are you gonna do with word order? What are you gonna do with line breaks, punctuation? Lots and lots of stuff to figure out. But then once you have that full version, then you cut it down to 100 lines, cut it down to 30 to 50, cut it down to 10 to 20. And the bottom two, you actually change the language so it's very simple. Could you say the same thing in a very simple way? And you're not saying the same thing. But it's okay, because you're going to show them that thing later. Okay, and it's a tough thing to do, but I think you can do it without disrespecting the original speaker, because you're just getting people to say, you're not ready for that yet. But we're going to get you there by saying, here's the baby version. Here's the kid version. Here's the young adult version. Here's the adult version. And that's not said to disrespect people. It's just saying, one of my elders said, it's like you're born again when you come into a language. And that sounds really wonderful and beautiful, but that means a baby can't talk, so you gotta be a little baby for a while. But it's okay, because we love babies. We're so nice to babies. And if a young kid says something wrong, We don't say, that's not how my grandma said it. You know, we just talk with that baby and we listen to that baby. And it's okay to sort of be in that situation and not see it as something that's disrespecting us and where we're at as learners and speakers. Natural conversations. How do people talk about things? What do they talk about? And what do people want to talk about right now? Let's give them some model conversations and some, just get elders together and get them to just talk with you. And it's usually not natural because there's a camera in their face, there's microphones on, and it just changes the dynamics. But the other part of this is try and figure out what you need them to say sometimes. For example, we didn't have good documentation of what women do when they're carrying a child. So I asked 2 elders who were women if they would talk about that, and they said, well, that's pretty sensitive, but okay, we'll talk about it. And when I started the camera, they weren't talking about it. And I was like, oh, bummer. Well, whatever they want to give me, I'll take it. And they just talked about growing up and working and gathering food and just their day-to-day life. Then they went into it. So also trust your elders to get you there. Sometimes they know the path that it takes to get there. Philosophies and cultural teachings. Can you get them to talk about, you know, like we were at a session, we took a break. We were going for, I think we went 6 hours a day, 5 days a week for 3 weeks, just working in the language, trying to speak it, teach it. And I took a break and I threw some rocks into the lake. And the elder came out, she says, you can't throw rocks in this lake. You're going to make bad weather. And then the weather just turned bad, you know. And I said, well, can you talk about that? Can I record you talking about that? And she said, yeah. You know, and so also getting like stuff that is deeply connected to the culture of the people. Explains why we do it. What do we, you know, when you see this thing, you got to give it tobacco and you got to say this thing. And then having multimedia versions. Your original recording, which might be audio, might be video, print, a slideshow, a breakdown of how it works. So you can also say, let's look at all the grammar that's in this thing. Handouts, maybe an animated, illustrated version. This is all part of the literature so that you have this material to use for teaching. And at some point, it might expand into a whole world of curriculum as language medium education. Do you have a world history book in your language? Do you have, you know, a science book? But that's maybe something down the road as you build yourself up and are starting to, you know, like I really like what the folks from the Sailor School were saying, build a fluency transfer system, then build an education system that uses your language as the medium of education. Okay, I think those are the same. So let's take a look at some examples. So here is the dictionary. I like to do artwork. I like graphic design. There was an Indigenous educator named Nancy Smith, who I worked for in the mid-90s at the University of Minnesota. And she was like, make a book out of this. And that really got me interested in how do you make a book? How do you print something? Because making a document is different than making a book, which is really just a collection of chapters that you put in a certain order. But there's a lot here. Whether you're talking about designing a cover or you're talking about the actual content within the dictionary. It's all very small print, but we'll zoom in on a couple of things here. But some stuff you could do, like all the formatting, like if we kind of, it's a little chunky, but if we zoomed in here and like this is blue and this is gray and this is italicized and this has a little dot, like all of that is set within this program called TLEX. And then you can export it and then you import it into another program called InDesign, and it does a lot of the formatting for you, but there are a bunch of additional steps. If you're into graphic design and making books. We can take a deep dive on that stuff later. We're just going to scratch the surface today. But what it doesn't do is put like this little thing to say, you're in the 0 section, and now you're in the A section. Like, so sometimes you have to do some of that stuff yourself. So sometimes it takes a lot to go in, copy, paste, keeping track of what you're doing in a particular section. But then these are what the verbs look like. So for Tlingit, they're organized by verb root. And then they are also, then within a verb root, you might have a particular verb. And then within this, it'll give you the verb theme. And then it'll go through and give you some examples, how to command someone, how to say do it, don't, doing it, in the process of doing it, did it, didn't do it, will do it, won't do it. And so they all sort of follow that. But this particular dictionary, it's not going to show you every single way to use that verb. It's going to say, here's the main ways you need to communicate, and you're going to have to learn how to switch the pronoun. If you want to say, I am drilling it, then that's something we'll work on outside of this dictionary. Otherwise, I think it's already like 700 pages long, so you got to stop at some point. And then there's other scholars who do this type of work as well. And then the last one is, here's the English section. So the English is in green, and then the main entrance for Tlingit is in blue, and then the definition is in black. So that's basically like constructing a dictionary. There's just decisions to be made. Like, what do you want it to look like? Do you want it to look like the Oxford Dictionary, or do you want it to look like something different? Because it doesn't have to. And then also getting into some specific entries. On the left, this is the entries for carrying things. So we got like 50 different verbs, because we're like carrying one thing, a bunch of things, empty thing, full thing, living thing, dead thing, rope-like thing that's coiled up, rope-like thing that's not, on sticks, whatever. But then sometimes there's things like na kla, a clan mother, then having cultural descriptions of that, like what does that mean? And so some of those, you can put a bunch of text in there so that when someone looks that up, they'll say, oh, I can't just, it might give them instructions on how to particularly use that word. Any questions about the dictionary?
For the color choices, it's funny, I use Dena for blue. I was wondering, like, when you're going through and color coding texts, what the conversations around, like, what's the target language, what's English, what's linguistics jargon, if like what your kind of like colors convey feeling for people. And
That's
so it's
interesting.
like, I don't know if you had those conversations. We went through those with like green and red is like stop and go. And then there's also like the visibility pieces of like choosing color and if it's digital versus print running cost and like when to use what's a consumable for the learner compared to what's a consumable for the like analyzer, and figuring out like are both the same when you start to go in, because like coding color is like a whole other set of analysis of selecting like in just the carpal tunnel of that all kind of thing. I was just curious if you have those kinds of conversations around color usage for learning.
If you're using like dictionary software, like TLEX, you can just put it in there. Like this entry is blue, and it's italicized. So you don't have to change all of them, which is pretty nice. And it exports into InDesign as both paragraph styles and text styles, so that you could change all. Like if you just said, okay, I want all of them to be red now. I don't like them green. You could change all of them, just like one click. And so that's pretty nice. I think I kind of tried to steer clear of red, just because I used to teach composition, and we never use, I've got a red pen, because the whole classic, like the English teacher put red all over my essay, and so we tried to, and it wasn't like a law, but just the one who was mentoring us said, maybe just use blue. So then I used blue to sort of say, this is the main color that's not black. And so when you look up, that's always the entry, and then black is always the information about the entry. And then I just picked green for English. It was a little bit more random than anything, but I think traditionally blue seems to kind of be like the main color for the entry itself. And that I just wanted people to find it right away. That's a great question.
Does your dictionary have a key for understanding how to read it? This is following someone's question in the chat.
Oh.
Like in the beginning.
Yeah, so in the beginning, because if you did, like we'll switch over and take a look at the dictionary. So there is a whole chapter about using this dictionary. Like, so how do you, because I've had people ask me, like, I was trying to find something, but I couldn't find it. Because now it goes I, high-toned I, double E, high-toned double E, because those are all the same vowel. But it will always alphabetize that way. So if you had a word that went H, I with the high tone, that would come first, and then H, E, E, that would come after that. But they wouldn't go, if you had them alphabetized by English, E comes before I think, I don't know. And so, but there's also a whole bunch of stuff like parts of speech, like what is a common noun, and what is a compound noun, and what is a verbal noun. So it does explain all of this in the introduction, which is, as you teach the language and as you figure out how you want to document the language, there's going to be a lot of decisions to be made about this stuff. And for some, you kind of want to put everything in there and then guide people towards it when they're ready. That's generally my approach for teaching the language, is if someone asks me a question, I'm like, oh, you want to talk about classifiers? And we're here on like day 3? Let's go then. And we'll do it. And I'll say, this is it. You don't have to know this stuff now. You might have to at some point. And then it also has a lot of stuff about codes and other things like that and how these things work. Because some of it, if it shows you, like we'll go look up the word for woodpecker. And so if you look up this word, you'll see gan, da, gugu, and then you'll see it's a compound noun, and it says it's a woodpecker. Then it gives you like the literal interpretation, pecks around the wood, and then it pulls all the little pieces apart for you, and then you go down here and then it sort of shows you what all those different parts mean. And that's not for everybody. Like if someone's just learning the language, they're not gonna be like, oh yeah, oh it's the gook verb root, oh interesting, But some other learners might want that information to see how this word gets put together. Okay, I'm gonna cheese. The workbook. It's almost ready. Version 2. So let's see. So some of the things with this is just trying to come up with a framework for individual chapters, the layouts. And so for this is for sound practice. So I wanted to have like what type of thing we're doing. And if you zoom in here, so like here's the letter. Here's a word that starts with that letter. Here's an image of that thing that we just sort of did. So this thing is guasha. And then this is a word that starts with GW. So just really having an intention for everything. So the layout of this book is, it does go through the sounds, where they're located, and it does go through them like, we'll do these sounds based on location. So it's not alphabetized. This is all about, let's do the sounds in front of your teeth. Let's do the sounds right behind your teeth. Let's do the sounds in the pizza burning zone. Let's do the sounds in the snoring zone. And so it does go through like that and uses, like if you go look up Zisk later as you practice it, then you'll find this exact same image should be there for the Zisk. And this shows all the sounds, but the Dauenhauers, they came up with this methodology was, once you move to chapter 1, all of the nouns have all sounds that are commonly found in English. No new sounds in that first chapter, even though they've practiced all the sounds. Now we back it up and we start building it up with concepts, fill in the blank type of phrases, and nouns that are not too difficult for speakers of English to say. Every chapter begins with some sort of quotation from a speaker or from a piece of literature that I think is culturally important, a translation of it, and then for folks that are interested, like a breakdown of every single part of every single word that's in that quote. Just sort of like, and again, we do a lot of this stuff where we say, that's there. If you want to ask about it, you can. We're not going to look at it right now. But then when we start the second year of Tlingit, they've already gone through this whole book. We go through it again, and then we show them everything. So, okay, now you're going to get to know this stuff. So they take the deep dive through the same text. And then after the first chapter, every chapter starts with a dialogue exercise, just two people, and then we'll practice this. And we take a lot of inspiration from Kingisti, David Katzik, who, if you know him, you would just love the way he would come into a class and he'd say, "You are not a robot!" He would just really yell and get inspired, and he had a lot of passion. And he would want people to put emotion into this. Because sometimes when you're learning a language, you're just so nervous about speaking. And so, wa, sa, iya, ti. But, yeah, hey. Singit, ke. And it's fine. It's fine to have a go through like that. And it's also, think about when you're going to have people start speaking in front of the group. We do a lot of stuff, I think, the first couple weeks where nobody says anything individually. We try not to. But then we start to get them to do that with little things. But at some point we say, okay, read that. Read that. Do that. And then you have people practicing it. And we were inspired by Kingisti years ago. And we did some of these things where we had a bad acting contest. It was a lot of fun, right? You have fun with the language. So someone, when they said they had a sore throat, they're on the ground and like just really being dramatic. It was really fun. At the end of every chapter, you have 10 things to translate from Tlingit to English, 10 things to translate from English to Tlingit, that are all things that are covered in the chapter. Cool. So that way they're putting this to use. And also you could come back, if you were working with some group and you're not sure where they're at, you can open up to a chapter and jump to the back and work on this. Say, okay, we got to do this stuff. So then you go back to the beginning of the chapter and start doing that. It also includes a lot of graphics, tables, a bunch of stuff to start getting them to think about the whole structure of the language and giving them a walkthrough on how to do it. Very intentional. Every chapter has an intention. We're learning how to do object pronouns here. Someone doesn't know what an object pronoun, that does not matter. Once you start doing the drill over and over, they'll start to figure this stuff out. And then they might come back to it a year later and say, oh, that's what we were doing with that thing, right? That's the workbook. Questions about that? If anybody wants the original files, like you can have them. If you want to try and manipulate it, mess around with it, go for it. If you want to work together and come up with a template that works for you, go ahead. I like a lot of open space in a page. I like to be sort of, try and get as much information in there as you can, but also have, like all of these things, all of this stuff is very measured out, like the width, the height of these, what's in here. If you kind of zoom in, you have the phrase, you have what it translates to, and then you have the breakdown of how it works. Right? Okay.
Do you have anything like objective or can-do statements?
What?
Like objective outcomes in the things, or have
I can statements, is that what you're talking about?
well, that would be one way to do it. The I can statements would be one way to do it.
I can introduce myself in the language or something.
I was just curious.
We kind of have at the beginning of the chapter of like what's going to be covered in this chapter. Like we're going to learn how to talk about body parts and how we're doing in terms of things hurting and aching and being sick. And so it does cover some of that stuff. And then it's kind of They used to do a lot of work for that to figure out how to scope and sequence Tlingit. So it's like able to do this, able to do that, able to do this. But I think the document got really cumbersome. And so those would be really good things to talk about though and figure out like what the specific objectives and intentions are. But it is here, like, so if you go through and as teachers, you should kind of have a pretty good idea of what each chapter is doing and then how that contributes collectively to the whole. And so because it's beginning though, it's not, all of that's not written out because I feel like it might help, but I feel like some students might look at it and say, well, I don't know what that thing is. So then maybe because I guess for Tlingit, one of the things I continue to hear, not from everybody, but on a regular basis, is they'll say, I don't feel comfortable going to intermediate. I think I'll go back and take beginning again. I just hear that a lot. And everybody who asks me that, I'm happy to have that conversation, but I'm going to tell you, no, don't keep going. But what I think is good to communicate if you have this sort of year of beginning, year of intermediate, year of advanced structure. What I've been telling students, I say, just because you're taking beginning doesn't mean you're a beginner when you start. You're a beginner when we're done. If you take intermediate, you're not an intermediate speaker when you start, but you should be when we're done. And same with advanced. Because I say, why should I take advanced? I'm not advanced. Because you're going to become advanced. That's how you do it. But for me, learning Tlingit anyways, the steps, like when you're just getting started, it's like you're just walking up these steps. Oh, all right. Hey, cool. And all of a sudden the steps are getting larger. And then when you're going like getting up into these advanced territory, like the step is way up, like they're very large steps. Like the difference between what we would consider a beginning low and beginning mid, that's a pretty big difference. But if you're talking about advanced low and advanced mid, like that's a huge, huge difference. So it's like when you're climbing a mountain and the mountain gets steeper as you get closer to the top. Okay.
I remember in the beginning when we did that chapter, and when we were done with the dialogue, our teacher, Kagwask, asked us to present it, like perform it in front of everybody. And it was so much fun because he made it into such a ceremony. He was like, like encouraging us as we went, and we were all like flinching, like, I don't know. When I see those words, I just like have so many fond memories of like that first experience, practicing a dialogue and saying it in front of everybody. Yeah, I liked it.
Okay.
You know, mind if I chime in real quick here? David Strong, Cluckhorn. So, you know, when I started taking your intermediate advanced class from what you were talking about, I had mentioned this to the beginner class at one of our group get-togethers. It was a lot of help going through those UAS classes because the way I saw them is, here's what I understand coming in, and then intermediate is what I don't know, and then going into advanced, what I had no idea existed. And once I realized that those are around, I felt a little more confident that I have the ability to look back at that and go back to it instead of that intimidation of, you know, I don't even know where to begin. It doesn't even matter. And I believe that's really helped me a lot. And I think that getting past that intimidation, just knowing what to expect now was very helpful.
Okay. Sheesh.
For your beginning class, do you cover like every prefix of your verb index, or do you split it? Is there by when have the students learned about every prefix in your sequencing?
Probably close, maybe that's a good question. Kind of depends on the group, but that sounds generally like second semester intermediate. So we do make them aware of prefixes, we make them aware of classifiers, but our focus becomes on switching the object and subject pronouns so that they can just say, I'm good, you're good, they're good, I'm eating, you're eating, they're eating. And then we sort of, that's our building block number one, is probably that. But then by the end of year one, they do get into, and so Kyle Whirl Kayak is a language teacher, and he had a really good suggestion with the workbook, which was shifting some of our chapters around. So like basically what these chapters are is we do what's this, what's that. So just very short things. Then we get into what do you see? And so by chapter 2, they get their first verb. And it's like, I see this, they see that, you see this. And so you're switching it right there. But you're not really dealing with, you're just sort of learning it as, here's the sounds that you make to say the thing. Once we get into chapter 3, we do start talking about some of this stuff because well, we're starting to change this pronoun to say, what are you called? I am called, you are called, they are called. And it starts to become a little bit more pointed. And at this point, we're also focusing on some of the pronouns like me, you, them, me, you, them. My, your, theirs, my, your, theirs. And then we start getting into the verb because those are built right onto the verb. We do a weather chapter because those verbs don't have any of that stuff in it. So you just say, it's snowing. Nobody's making it snow. And then we get into body parts and feeling, like states of being, kinship terms, how are you? And this is where we get really into the pronoun quite a bit, the object pronoun. What are they doing? Now we're getting into the subject pronoun. What are they eating? Now we are switching that a little bit more decisively. And then we get to where are you going? And this is motion. But we're still not doing a whole lot on like what these actual prefixes are other than the ones that say who's doing it and who's happening to. But the last chapter does the future and the perfective. That's where we really start to say, here are these things. And we start with the ones that start to move the verb into different modes. So to get the future, you got to have these 3 things. To get the perfective, you got to have this thing, and the classifier does this. So we do start to do that, but we also, I give no expectations of being able to understand it. I just say, you just need to know it's there. You just need to know it's there. And then look at this prefix. Look at how it pops up like this way. Look at how it pops up like this time. And then when we get to the intermediate stuff, that's when we start to really pull it apart.
Yeah, I relate to that because my whole first year in beginning, all I focused on was memorizing phrases and then repeating them, applying them. And then I found that helpful because by intermediate, we started looking at the grammar and I could like apply it to a phrase I already knew. So it was like breaking down something I already memorized. I found that helpful for me.
Okay, can we take 5? And then we'll go to the home stretch.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, take 5.
Is the beginning workbook recorded?
You mean like,
The little cabinet, is it recorded?
no, that would be a wonderful thing.
Yeah, I was just thinking.
Dr. Thank you, Dr. Kane.
Huh. Okay, 5-minute break.
I saw it too.
25 minutes. I'm trying to get through everything. All the things.
You can do it.
All right. A lot of fun sharing information with you folks, hanging out with you folks. Gonna cheesh. So the last thing I'll show you of stuff that I've been working on, and then there's other things. There's a big book of Raven stories that's coming out at some point. There's an illustrated children's book that we've been working on. There's a phrase book that we've worked on recently where we tried to break it down for language for specific parts of the home. So things in the kitchen, things in the bathroom, things in the front porch, things in the living room. And so there's always something to be made. And it's good to sort of figure out where to put your time, where to put your energy. And I think one of the really important things is trying to get from concept and vision to the framework, to making the thing, and to putting it out there, and really become productive in that, so that as you make something, don't get stuck in the process of making it, right? Which is, you'll probably always be making it and tinkering with it and stuff, but just get in the process of putting it out there, putting it out there, putting it out there, in terms of really filling the shelves with stuff. And then I would say continue to hone the practice of desktop publishing and getting stuff ready, and I'll have a few things to say about that. But I do want to just talk about the grammar a little bit. So here's a grammar of the Tlingit language. This started off as under the title, Understanding the Tlingit Verb. And there's a lot of students who are credited into introduction because they dealt with hundreds of pages just being thrown at them during classes as I was trying to figure out how I was going to teach some of these concepts and I was going to understand them myself. Then it just grew into this sort of bigger project where it's kind of giving you an introduction to how the whole language works. Every component of the language, not everything, but the primary components of the language I think are explained. And then I was sitting next to Kasech Selena Everson. We were testifying and trying to make Alaska Native languages the co-official languages of Alaska. And then I heard her just say, our language saved us. I thought, that's what the book should be called. And one of my colleagues, his name is Seth Cable, and he says, this isn't just about the Tlingit verb. He's like, this is way bigger than that. And so I'll credit both of them for coming up with, one, to say it needs a different name, and two, for putting the name into my hands. So this one is kind of different because it is a lot of text that just explains how the language works and then gives you a whole bunch of tables with a whole bunch of stuff in it. So it's not the most interactive text. I'm still sort of in this point where I'm like, I really need to design a lot more interactive handouts for every one of these chapters, but I had to get this thing done so I could sort of say, there it is. If you want to know what a classifier is and how it works, you can read about it in here. If you want to know what stem variation is, you can read about it in here. And I tried to be as non-terminology heavy as possible, created lots of blank space in here just so that the text is kind of in these small areas and your eye has a lot of room to sort of move around on the page. And also, I like creating illustrations. I really like stick figures. I'll put hats on them and other things. Have them doing stuff, being places to help show some of these concepts. And then trying to create a whole bunch of illustrations that show how the language works. I've got switchboards, I've got blocks, I've got little things that you can put on a board game now. Just always trying to think. I got one that's a tree, and just trying to think of a whole bunch of different visual representations of some of this stuff because it's kind of complicated. And then a lot of tables, and some of these tables are showing you the pronouns, and then some of these tables are showing you the verb and how it starts to change. Could you say that? And then it starts to break down all the different pieces that are in here. And then this lists pretty much all of the verb prefixes, not all of them. So the goal of this is not to document everything, because I think James Crippen is doing a great job of that, but to show you the essentials. I think in order to really use the language, like there's a lot of the stuff that's already in here, and it just sort of gives you a walkthrough of some of the tables. Like this is taken right from James Crippen. But then there's some explanation. Oh, is that text cut off? Uh-oh. Okay. So that gets us to video. Okay. So thinking about video, whether you're talking about video that you're working on that someone else recorded, or whether this is video that you're going to record. The thing is like knowing what your intention is. Are you documenting the language? Or are you creating like a lesson? Or are you doing a dialogue exercise? Are you doing some sort of creative content? I had a student who said, can I make a film in Tlingit as my final? I was like, beautiful. It's a brilliant film. It's great. It's like a murderer on the loose. It was amazing. Then I think we need a lot of this stuff. We need little short skits, little comedy things. We need all kinds of stuff in the language. I think it would be so great to just keep producing content. But then not everybody is into making, you could do a lot with your phone right now. Like it's amazing how much you could do with a phone these days as opposed to 10 years ago, right? But then also if someone has a camera and wants to be the film person for this, then that's great. But I'd say make the video quality as high as you can, but also keep in mind storage limitations. You could fill up a terabyte very easy if you're doing video work. Think about the budget to do this stuff. Try and figure out if you're going to hire someone to come in and film something, try and find someone within your language working group who can go learn from them. Say, we'd like to hire you to make this film, and we'd also want you to teach this person how to do it. And then ability, like what do you not know how to do, and what do you need to learn how to do? Do you know how to edit video? Do you know how to edit audio? Do you need someone to learn how to do that? Then when you're recording audio, put the microphone in the right spot. Like that is really important because you might have a really great speaker, but nobody can hear them. And similar to this, the very first elder I ever recorded on video, I said, okay, talk about how loud you're going to talk. So he goes, test, 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 test. And I set the level. And I didn't really know very much about the camera at the time. I hit record. I was like, okay, go. He goes, oh, go away. So he's like just blew out everything. And I was like, ugh. But I didn't want to also get out. So the other thing is if you can have someone who knows the language running the camera and running the interview, absolutely helps. I have been fortunate to get folks documented that other people haven't. And a lot of that was just sort of being able to speak to them in the language and ask them in the language, what do you want your grandchildren to know? If you tell me, I will try to teach it to them. And that really unlocked a lot, including some people who stopped speaking for significant portions of their life. And then they started talking. Background noise. You might have to tell someone and ask them to turn off the TV. I've had to do it, including working in the house of an elder whose spouse is also an elder, loved to watch TV. And I had to say, I'm very sorry. I know I'm coming in here and interrupting your life, but we're paying you guys. Would you please turn the TV way down when we're recording? I can hear it on the microphones. And because Nora Dowenhauer said her uncle, when she first started recording, a lot of the elders were angry. They didn't want to do it. But they started to see what it could do. And then one of them called and said, your uncle's dying. He wants you to record him one last time. Jumped on a plane, flew to Huna, got everything set up. Did not ask people to turn the TV off. And you cannot hear what he said because he was so weak. Don't let that happen. You're going to have to be the bossy person sometimes. There was a guy named Art Johns. He was so fun. He's so fun to talk to. And we were recording 3 elders, and I had these little clip-on microphones, but I only had 2. So I was like, okay, I'm going to have to use a shotgun mic, and it records like kind of the whole room. And they're talking, and it's wonderful. And we're out in this kind of language retreat out at a camp. And he opens the door, and it's got like a squeaky hinge. It's got hardwood floors, and he wears cowboy boots. Ka-clump, ka-clump. So I was like, just kind of looking at him. He's an elder. So I came over later. I said, cowboys don't walk softly, do they? He goes, no, they don't. So, sometimes you're gonna have to just live with stuff, but do as much as you can. Try not, some people will get upset, but that's your chance to get it sometimes. You never know when it's gonna be your last chance to get something. The process, you have to record it, you have to transfer it, you got to really understand your media, like what kind of card is it, what's the capacity, did you transfer that stuff so that when you grab the camera to go record someone, when you're out of space, right? So just have a good process, active recording. When that act is over, you go into the act of transfer. Transfer right away, clean your cards up, put your stuff away so you're ready to go. Then you're in the editing process, publishing, transcription, and translation. I publish through YouTube. I think it's a great way to do it. I know some people don't like YouTube, but the thing that I like about it is you can watch it on any device. The other thing is you can add and edit and replace subtitles very quickly, and it's pretty simple on YouTube. And you don't have to embed the subtitles into the video, because then if there's a mistake or it's something you need to add, you got to redo the whole thing. Whereas through YouTube, you upload a subtitles file and then you could just turn them on or turn them off. It's pretty neat. And then there's also going through social media, websites, whatever you want to do. Like my preference is just to use YouTube. It's right there. The tools are all sort of built into it. There are some issues like if people start watching your channel, you start getting a lot of traffic on your channel, there's gonna be ads that pop up, and it's not the worst thing though. I don't know.
Suffering from success.
What's that?
It's like the DJ Khaled album, Suffering from Success.
Yeah, right? Get too popular. The next thing is audio. So sometimes you might have older material that's on outdated media. Like you might have something that's on cassettes and you gotta get it off of cassette. You gotta get it off of reel to reel. Anybody know De Laguna came up here in the 1950s? Anybody know what she recorded on?
It was reel to reel.
It wasn't.
It absolutely was reel to reel, yeah.
I thought it was a wire recorder.
It's a wire recorder.
Was it?
Yeah. And I thought in my brain it was reel to reel for sure. And I went to the American Philosophical Society and I saw this spool of wire. And I was like, how does that even, I don't even know how that works. I don't know anything. But yeah, so her recordings are there in the transfer. Like sometimes you have a bad transfer. So for example, we were working on a De Laguna recording and had so much noise in it and we couldn't we're blowing our ears out trying to hear it. And so we reached out to someone at the American Philosophical Society because we heard that they had it there. But at the time, I didn't know any folks who were working there. So I tried to create an account and I was trying to contact someone and I wasn't having any luck. So I contacted this historical librarian. I said, do you know anyone over here? He's like, yeah, I know some people. I was like, can you help us get this recording so we have a clean copy? He says, yeah, let me reach out. And so he meant to write like, hello, Bob. We're trying to find this recording and they're not having any, or these folks are trying to find this recording and they're not having any luck. Can you help them out? But he made the greatest typo of all time. He forgot the O on hello. It's like, hell, Bob, these guys have been trying for weeks to get this recording. Can you get it to them? And they're like, shut up. I had a good laugh. And I told him, he's like, well, it worked. But with that, I would recommend the Digital Knowledge Sharing Fellowship at the American Philosophical Society. They give you $3,000. They'll fly you to Philadelphia. You look at their collection. They do digital transfers there. I think the Alaska Native Language Center can. I think the Alaska Heritage Institute can. UAS, we can. So get the stuff into a digital format. If you are recording audio, same things. Put the mic as close as you can to them. Eliminate background noise. If you're in a big boomy area, maybe try and find a quieter area. get the levels right, get it as loud as you can without getting distortion, which is a bit tricky. You can get noise out of old recordings. You can adjust the levels and you can cut stuff out, like get a bunch of stuff in the beginning, like let's say they hit record and the person didn't start talking until 2 minutes in. You could cut all that 2 minutes out. There's nothing on there. And then you can put it in a Google folder or a Dropbox. You can create finding guides. So we have 500 tapes by Nora Dowenhauer and also collections from Forrest DeWitt and also collections from Nation's Story. And an amazing project is they paid a couple of different speakers to just listen to these recordings and jot down everything that's on them. Then they made this finding guide. And it's wonderful. So now you've got this, you can go do an internet search for like a clan. Like I could put in Shungu Katie and it'll pop up a bunch of different things where they're talking about that clan. And then, let's see. I do recommend this software. It's called Isotope. Oops, did I spell it wrong? Isotope. Isotope RX9 audio editor. If you want the pro version, it is about $1,000, but if you've got someone who can buy that for you, it does a lot of the work for you. If you got a bunch of wind in a recording, it'll get a lot of that wind noise out of there. If you got a bunch of hiss on the tape, it'll get a lot of that out of there. If you got a big boomy room, it'll get a lot of that reverb out of there. And it does it with really just like kind of push of the button. There's this one part of it called spectral denoise. And then if you do that, slide this bottom thing all the way over to best. And then you can preview it and then listen to it. And there are some recordings where if you start to clean it up too much, it starts to create additional noise in there. But this has been really effective. Like I've cleaned up recordings and gotten really good versions and gotten a lot of noise out of there. Okay. I'm going to skip that. Let me check the chat. Okay.
I have a question. I'm stunned that Frederica de Laguna used a wire recorder. And so that brings to mind, why did she feel the need to use a pitch pipe at the beginning of every recording?
Well, I do think it was going in, like I think there it was, because the pitch pipe, usually they would blow it to make sure if the tape was slowed down or sped up that you could fix it afterwards. And so it might have, like I don't even know how it works, but it fits in it's about the size of a roll of tape.
Yeah.
Wow.
I'm just stunned. Okay, thank you. Learn something.
Send you a
I
picture.
would have never known.
I was convinced too. And then I saw it, I was like, that's the thing? Okay, so again, what I've done for Tlingit is really these three things. A blog, tlingitlanguage.com, a Google folder that's hosted by UAS, and a YouTube channel, which is if you go to youtube.com/UASANLS. Basically, the blog points to those two things. You create links and put them up there, and links to classes. For example, if we go back to the blog, let's see, where'd it go? Oh, there it is. So under Learning Tlingit, if we go to, say, Intermediate Tlingit, as you scroll down, these are all the handouts we use for the class. These are additional resources we use for the class. Here's intermediate and advanced resources that we introduce and we use in the class. There are some things using a blog where you can write it in your language, right? So let's say you had stuff that you didn't want to share with everybody, and it's just for the language community. This is how you could do it if you wanted to. And then you go down. Here's the Zoom link for to access the class. Here's the curriculum folder, a bunch of stuff that we sort of use. So like, if there's stuff we start using on a regular basis, I'll put it up here above the line where the classes start. Once you get under this line, this is the class for March 3rd. Here's what we did. Here's the handouts that we used. And then here's the recording. So that's the basic sort of structure. I record every single class I teach, every single workshop I teach, and I put it on here so that people can access it. I'm not worried about whether or not they're paying tuition. I'm not worried about anything. I just want to create access for language learners and just say, if you don't want to be affiliated with the university, that's totally fine. You don't have to be. If you want to just learn it, here you go. If you can't make it because that doesn't fit your schedule, here you go. And then there's ways, the missing component right now is probably ways for everybody to interact with each other, create study sessions, talking sessions, more times to be in the language, whether that's virtually or in person. But at least a lot of the resources are placed here. Okay, you can get cassette and VHS tapes digitized. If you think you have stuff that's fragile, I would probably recommend working with archivists. I could do some of that stuff, but I haven't had a tape break on me, and I don't know what I'd do. Probably panic. Let's see. A couple more things before we go, I guess, as we wrap up. Graphics. There are two major types of graphics. There are images and there are illustrations. The big difference between those is an image is technically a whole bunch of dots of color. And that's what an image is. So every picture that you take with your phone is actually created millions of dots and fills them with a single color. The more dots you have, the higher resolution, and the more your eye cannot see those individual dots. But you cannot blow that thing up. There's a certain size where all of a sudden you start to see those, it looks like squares. It starts to get like square images like this little thing right here. An illustration is a vector image, which means you can make it bigger and smaller. It does not change. It'll still look as crisp as it did before. I use both of these. If I need a picture of a piece of dry fish, the way we make it, because I want to put that in the dictionary and then eat it, then I will use my camera to take a picture of it. For a lot of those stuff, all those stick figures, those are all vector illustrations. A lot of my other things I create for concepts like distance and space, those are all vector things. Stock images, I use the Adobe Creative Suite. I do recommend it. I primarily use Photoshop and Illustrator. I also use Adobe stock images. You can just pay a monthly subscription. If someone will buy this for you, put it in your grant. Get a subscription to these things. You got access to all kinds of fonts. I would say stick to as few fonts as possible. I use 3 fonts. I try not to use more than 3. I use this one called Brill, which is my favorite. But if you're going to publish something, you have to buy it from them for $150. And a Canoe Basic is my favorite for kids and stuff we're doing for young people because the letter A looks like how you would handwrite a letter A. And I use Avenir Next and Helvetica New. Those are tied for my 3rd favorite. I used to use this one, and a Cambria I think is pretty good. For me, it all comes down to, can they handle an underline that's a combined diacritical marker? For some of you, you might have the thing with the little hat. You might have a little dot under the G. Brill can usually, I think, can handle them all because these are designed by linguists to be working in multiple languages. I do not recommend fonts that are hard to read, like this one over here that I'm using. because they're just hard to read, even though they're like fancy. Like, I wish it would look like a comic book. Well, you're making a comic book, fine. But for your curriculum and stuff, like really try not to have 6 different fonts on all your stuff. I just don't think you should. You develop a consistent look this way. You develop a consistency that I think helps the learner because they don't have to try and figure out, they'll just recognize it, I think, if you make it the same. Also, if you start throwing special characters in there, all of a sudden you got this X that looks like it came from somewhere else. I don't recommend doing handwriting type of stuff. I just don't make it hard to read. Like, if you want to make your wedding invitation and thing it, go ahead then. But for your curriculum, I would say no. Let's see. This is what InDesign looks like in a future workshop. I'd be happy to show you the ins and outs of InDesign. I learned all this software. I learned it myself using YouTube videos, using forums, and just goofing around with it. It all goes back to when I was an undergrad and someone said, make a book for these people, for our program. And I had to figure out how to do it. And then I was using InDesign when it was something, I can't remember what it was called back then. But it's also, it works different than a word processor because you have to lay all the boxes in there. If the text runs out, you've got to tell it where it's going to go. So you have to set all of that stuff up. But it's so powerful in terms of where you're putting things, how much control you have over it, dealing with chapters that are part of a book and getting everything to the page numbering across the chapters and all that stuff. This is Illustrator. It's fabulous. It does take a lot to get used to. Now, if you have any specific questions with this software, let me know. I'd be happy to see if I can solve anything. This Photoshop, I ran out of time. I was going to make just for Eminem because I like his new color of hair. I think it's not even my joke. I heard this joke about just for men and just for Eminem as he changed his hair color, and I thought it was hilarious. I was trying to like even make the font look, I was like, I can't spend so much time on this. I got work to do. I'm not going to tell you how long I spent before I gave up. I'm not going to tell you. You get to see it here. Okay. I also recommend this program called Popcar, Popchar. It is about $40, but you can also, Photoshop and Illustrator and InDesign will not let you do combined keyboard strokes. So if you got the Crippen keyboard and you want to push Option X to get the underline X as a character, you can't do that in Photoshop and InDesign. You could add it later, but you can't do that with both. So you could type outside of it and then paste in, or you can use this. And you can also use, these are the little things. So if I've got like teen and teen and teen, which are 3 different verb roots, I can mark them as 1, 2, and 3 using this. There's a lot to be said about telex. We're running out of time though. Let's see. Let me make sure there wasn't anything else I was going to show you folks. Well, I'll open telex just so you can see it and then we'll wrap up. So this is the telex software. There's a lot to it, but once you've built it the way you want it to go, it is very powerful in terms of a streamlined way to enter new information into a dictionary. So this root marker means that it's a verb. That's all that it marks, is that it's a verb, and that marks specifically the verb root. So if we go down to nukts, and then we can see within here, so nukts is a verb root, and then chnukts is a verb. And so you can build the verb here, and you enter all this stuff manually, and there are a lot of steps. I would be interested in sort of a joint project where we create a bunch of dictionaries for a bunch of our languages and sort of smash through this stuff together. I made 100 mistakes. Some of them are really big mistakes, and some of them are just really annoying mistakes. Like, I should have been doing this the whole time. Now I gotta go change 1,000 entries. But it's part of the learning process as we grow our own, which is what I want to come back to. Grow our own so that we don't have to worry about someone taking a different job and then, or not getting something they want and leaving. You know, I saw someone leave our community and take all the data with them. We had this online talking dictionary. You could click the things, it said it for you, and it all went away. And I think it was deliberate. I can't prove it. I think it was deliberate. But maybe it wasn't. Maybe someone just didn't have a backup plan and they lost their data. But I think through it all, make it easy to see, make it pleasant to see, be productive, be positive, love each other, be supportive, and let's try and think of like, what's the next fun thing? Then what? Then what? Then what are we gonna do? Let's just keep making stuff for our languages. And if you have questions about the specific processes, let me know. And any thoughts or questions as we wrap up?
Yeah, we've been talking during our lunch break about videos we want to make in the language, and we're just like so excited to work on them. We've been writing our scripts and stuff. So that's one thing we took away from today. It was just that inspiration to create something. So we're gonna choose.
I wanted to do a Sing It hotline video. It was like a classic like red phone. Like, okay, well, to say the carrying, what are you carrying? Okay, a bucket. Okay, is there anything in the bucket? Okay, here's the verb. And then, okay, here's what you name your puppy. Show me a picture of the puppy. Okay, you know, and that'd be like a book of puppy names. People ask me that all the time. I was teasing. I said, my next book is called Here's What You Name Your Damn Cats. Anything else?
You were going to talk about the role of non-natives in projects like this, and I guess since that's what I am, it would be relevant what to do and not do. I guess you already did talk about the things not to do.
Yeah, I guess my primary recommendation is make sure Indigenous people are in charge. And then if you have non-Indigenous peoples who want to work in your communities, I think that's fabulous. I think people have done some amazing stuff, and my general recommendation is to have some sort of working agreement that just says you cannot claim ownership to any particular portion of our language or our culture. You cannot tell anybody to not work in our language and our culture. And those would probably be my two things. I would make them sign it. Sign on a piece of paper, or else we'll take all your names away. Just because I've seen some stuff, I've seen people lose access to their own language, and I don't want that to happen to anybody. I think we've been through enough trauma that then we go through, and now someone else is keeping our language from us. Like that for me is pushing things too far. Everything's already been pushed too far. But I also recognize that the world is complicated. There's savior complexes. I think there's also some, not with everybody, but I do think there's some deeply embedded racist concepts which come down to this. I know what they need, not them. And that is nested in white supremacy, and it pops up. And I just say it's like that little gopher game, just push it back down. Or you just, but I think preventative measures can be taken. And I think there's some people who just do a great job and don't try to take over and don't try to claim it as their own and don't try to, you know, someone said, they said they were really upset with me, and they said, you're taking my work and you're manipulating it or something like that. And I said, Haswasanech ayaha yukatangi ka uhansu yeha guxanech ha yukatangi. Achwe teshach twa oshku khan kinegi wasaat kakone ha yukatangi team. Yewa achtuuch ya yidat kat yuhan haji ye yeti hayukatangi. Kunachoy hastu ya akta ye jakachtune ya hadachkan kisani. Just wuchi na ya kakachtu akta kat yuhan. Kunchisha khedisa akhi ya yaki. Wasach tuasaku shakhe tlaya yiji ye yeti. Akayi yukatangi. Kuchte ke nasach shakata yukatangi. Kuchte ke nasach. Achawe wasa shitsi nawe hastu yejene. Hastu itiqaku khasatiya yidat. Hastu yakhaya yejakachtune. Gunchish. Which was a bigger, I didn't say all of that to the person, but kind of got fired up.
Yeah, I don't think I'm.
Short translation is, this isn't ours. It belongs to our future generations. And it was made for us. And it's something that saved our ancestors. It's something that will save us and future generations. So my hope is that good fortune is in your hands as you're doing this work, and that your work feels light, and that you don't feel overburdened, and that we build a supportive network of people who you can reach out. We got that hotline ready. Like, my font won't work. I hate this world. Just so that we can just lean on each other when we're having a hard time. Because sometimes our elders leave us and we're just distraught. We can reach out and hold on to each other's canoe in those moments. And we can help each other. And we can build this thing up so that it can't be taken from us. It can't be kept from us. And that there's success becomes that much easier so that generations from now, people could look at us and say, they kept the path clear for us. Any closing thoughts? Anybody want to say anything before we go?
Well, just thank you. Thanks so much for doing this. It's been an honor to get to meet you and hear all that you have to say. So thanks.
Okay. Okay, well, it's been fabulous, folks.
I just wanted to say Awata from the Iach, and it's, I think with your help and just like the support of other communities in Alaska, I think that we are keeping our heads above water. We're probably doing a little bit better than even that now. I think 10 years ago we were pretty dispirited, but today we don't feel that way. It used to be that we were embarrassed that we didn't know our language, terribly embarrassed. And now we have a solid group of people, small, that are determined to pass this down, and people of all ages, by the way. So it's really just a wonderful little community to be part of with our language. So thank you so much for your help.
Thank you. This is a wonderful workshop.
Wonderful.
And if you want to put a beginning VAC language course on the books, let's do it. We're not trying to take control of anything, but if you want to take the same path that Lincoln Hyde and Simshan does, let's make that path.
Okay, we're on that canoe.
Okay.
Well, first I would just like to thank you, Kohasakuk, for having this workshop and for allowing us to come and visit you on your homelands. It's been so wonderful. And thank you to the UAA Faculty Initiative Fund for supporting us and supporting this workshop and supporting you and everyone here. We were hoping that we could schedule a business meeting with all the folks who attended last week, maybe sometime this week or next week, because I know folks are tired. It's been a lot of work, and language work is emotional work, and it's healing work, and it's community work. I think a lot of folks on these calls have been hungry to connect with all of us here. So perhaps we could reach out to folks afterwards and schedule a business meeting of sorts.
Great. Okay. Yeah, everybody who registered, we have your emails now. Haha. And and we will be reaching out about ways to connect. Because yeah, this is part of another vision about having just like a lot of us do, like I work and I do humanities meetings and other types of meetings. And I'm like, why do I do those meetings? Why can't I just meet with the language people and just those are my people? And I think we're going to sort of move things in that direction. So that this isn't something that only happens once every few years, but we can have it so we can have workshops like this, and then we can also just have work sessions where we're really just sort of brainstorming, problem solving, and figuring out what are the next steps that all of us need. That's
And Karasakuk also to Sandra Shaganoff Stewart, the chair of AKNS too at UAA. Thank you for everything that you've done for this fifth. And Dr. Maria Williams, she's on as well. Thank you so much, Dr. Maria. We wish you could be here, but we feel so supported by you and Dr. Chris Stivey down at KPC as well. So Karasakuk to this whole amazing, beautiful team.
When will this be available?
Yeah, I can upload the recordings. I think I got one email to me from the first day, from the other, I want to say last week, but it was just like 2 days ago. So 2 days ago. And then I should have them up in the next couple
I
days.
need to email you the other recordings.
Once I get them, they go up pretty fast. Okay. Cheese klein. Which way I eat that? That's it. Kwati. Oh, Koneoti, do you want to say something?
Oops. Klein Gunnis Chish. Ya Yejine Hawak Sheik. Iati. Hatsu Yik Eya Yin Yechat Uti Yaigi.
Cheese.
Stakat Yuhan ya Yayi Yukatangi Adat Yeji Ne Jadusa Yag Ha in Creati Yig Kwan Hadichank Ian Giesaya Adat Yeji Tune Kunchish
Hawasa yuqatangi qeqaqsiti.
Kunchish.
Good cheese. And reach out. Got any questions? Want some help? Just let me know. Kecha.